The mere mention of the title Stranger Things sends your brain into a frenzy, followed by the extremely captivating theme song. Along with that amazing intro credit sequence came some lovable characters and visuals that played on some hardcore sci-fi nostalgia. That's part of what makes this show so great. The references to classic sci-fi and horror movies are on point. Before you rush off to the Upside Down and hear our list, head on over to the subscribe button and join the notification squad to stay up to date with all the latest videos. But first, it's quiz time. Can you guess what feature film these emoji are showing? Find out at the end of the video. E.T. To anyone who loves this show and has seen Spielberg's film E.T., it's pretty obvious that it was a huge point of reference for Stranger Things. Both are about a lovable yet threatening alien, so to speak, with fantastic powers. They both have a kid hiding the alien in their home. At one point, E.T. also dons a blonde wig and dress just like Eleven's. Eggo waffles become Eleven's staple, while E.T. loved bite-sized Reese's Pieces. We also see E.T. and Elle experience the wonder of television for the first time. Both have a working, financially struggling single mother. Oh, and let's not forget the bicycles and the very crucial getaway scene. In E.T., there's the famous scene in which Elliot and his squad are riding away from government agents, and E.T. uses his powers to make them all fly over the police barricade. If you haven't seen the movie, you still know this scene. In Stranger Things, Eleven and the boys are also trying to get away while riding their bicycles. But instead of flying, Eleven uses her mind to flip a van full of government baddies. Well done, Duffer Brothers. A Nightmare on Elm Street. 1, 2, Freddy's Coming for You. A Nightmare on Elm Street was the film that made us terribly afraid to fall asleep. The villainous Freddy Krueger proved that no one is safe, not even in your dreams. In the film, he pops into teens' dreams to make their lives terrible because that's what spooky guys do in horror movies. As if being in high school wasn't tough enough, right? In the remake and classic version of the film, there's a scene in which the wall stretches as Freddy comes into the scene. Look familiar? That's because it happens in Stranger Things as well. The Demogorgon makes some funky things happen to the walls too. But that's not all of it. There's also a scene in which Nancy and Jonathan rig Jonathan's house with booby traps and torch the creature. Just like the other Nancy in Elm Street, she traps and lights Freddy on fire. There are two Nancys. Do you think that's a coincidence? They're both faced with the stuff of nightmares, and these kids can't seem to catch a break. Which of these scary guys would you be the most afraid to go up against?
Creepy Carrie!
Carrie. The master of horror novels, Stephen King, has produced some of the best scary and sci-fi stories of our generation. The movies based off of his novels have been equally as frightening and amazing. We're looking at you, It. The classic scary movie Carrie is based on King's novel of the same name. As with all great horror films, there was in fact a remake. But for the purposes of this section, we're only going to refer to the classic. The protagonist, Carrie White, played originally by Sissy Spacek, has telekinetic powers that she's trying to figure out. Sometimes they end up causing a bit of violence. If this sounds familiar, it's because Carrie and Eleven both have similar powers. They're also generally sweet girls that seem harmless. Until they're provoked, that is. Then all heck breaks loose. At this point, they're willing to hurt anyone that stands in their way or threatens them. There's also a great homage to the end of Carrie. If you recall, we see Carrie's grave and then her hand popping out from the dirt. In Stranger Things, we see Nancy's hand burst through the tree portal to the Upside Down, which of course made us jump the same way Carrie did. Altered States. What's up with the sensory deprivation tanks? Towards the end of the first season of Stranger Things, we see the main characters build a sensory deprivation tank for Eleven. It's meant to help her focus her powers and see if she can find Barb and Will. Seems like a scary thing to do as a kid, but luckily Joyce is there helping Eleven feel safe. Unlike all of the other time she spent in the tanks at the Hawkins lab by herself. Can you imagine how terrifying that must be? Using it as an experience for focus is one thing, but they make Eleven explore the Upside Down. No thank you, we'll pass. Now for those of you who have also seen the sci-fi show Fringe produced by J.J. Abrams, you're probably already knowledgeable about the concept of sensory deprivation tanks. Fun fact for you sci-fi lovers, both of these shows are actually referencing a sci-fi film from the 80s called Altered States. Sensory deprivation tanks play a large part as one of the main characters uses the tank to tap into areas of his mind that no one ever could. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it?
I'm locked inside the Fratelli's basement with this guy.
Rocky Road?
The Goonies. When we first watched Stranger Things, we got some major nostalgic vibes that felt really similar to the film The Goonies. This show feels loaded with Goonies references. Doesn't Dustin remind you of a Chunk-like character? Especially in the scene where he finds a stash of chocolate pudding and shouts at Mike about his treasure findings.
Mike! I found the chocolate pudding!
Looks like that darn lunch lady was hiding them. This is totally similar to the Goonies, where Chunk finds an ice cream stash and calls out to the rest of the group. So many feels, right? In the show, we follow a group of preteens who share a love of comic books and Dungeons and Dragons. These outsiders also share qualities with the misfits in the Goonies, like, for example, their innocence. The difference is that the Goonies go on an adventure because of a map they found. In Stranger Things, the kids are on a journey to find their missing friend. Also, can we talk about Barb for a second? She was the doomed character and fan favorite in Stranger Things. Poor Barb, she deserved better. But have you noticed that her face looks very similar to Steph in the Goonies? They could be long-lost sisters. Alien. The iconic franchise Alien has some of the most visually intriguing creatures we've seen, so naturally there have been sequels, remakes, and spin-offs. But we've also seen some inspiration of H.R. Geiger's designs in Stranger Things, especially in the Upside Down. In Alien, there are slimy creatures that use humans as incubators. There are also the terrifying creatures that stick to the victims' faces. They're pretty cool looking, but still, gross. In Stranger Things, we see something reminiscent of these terrifying aliens. Remember those slimy, slug-looking things that cover Barb's face? We still get chills. Remember the greenish, slimy, webbed entry portals into the Upside Down? The pulsing red heart and slimy webbing totally look like the facehugger pods in Alien, don't they? Speaking of those guys, when Will is found, Joyce and Hopper pull something out of Will's throat, which apparently filled him with slug spawns. Sound a bit familiar? And how about those hazmat suits? They're used in both Alien and Stranger Things. Everyone knows hazmat suits are impenetrable, right? And when Nancy yells, it's a direct reference to the scene in Aliens when Ripley shouts something similar at the Alien Queen. Stephen King's Firestarter. In yet another Stephen King adaptation, the film Firestarter is another source of inspiration for Stranger Things. The main character, Charlie McGee, played by Drew Barrymore, has a very similar upbringing to Eleven. In fact, we think they'd have a lot to talk about. Heck, they might even be best friends in an alternate universe. Much like the title suggests, little Charlie sets things ablaze when prompted. Don't let the cuteness fool you. Daddy's little pyro is not someone you want to mess with. Both girls have psychic powers, and are tormented through countless experiments run by scientists trying to weaponize their power. They both also get hooked up to brainwave monitors so that the evil scientists can track their progress. The homage is apparent in one scene where Eleven starts a fire with her mind after she overloads the long-wave radio at school to try to get in touch with Will. Totally not a coincidence, which is why we love this show. Eleven and Charlie also both use their powers to take out the baddies once they decide they've had enough. What these girls have gone through is enough to make anyone lose their mind. Close Encounters and Poltergeist. If someone were to tell you that a lost loved one is communicating with them, you'd find it a bit surreal, wouldn't you? Now if they told you that they've been talking with them via lights, you'd probably think they've gone a bit screwy. In Stranger Things, Joyce, played by Winona Ryder, is sure that her missing child Will is the one who was making lamps light up in her home. She eventually goes ham and covers the place in Christmas lights and even creates an alphabet wall. A really brilliant idea, actually. But naturally, she's dismissed as being distressed about her son. But eventually Hopper and others come to believe her. In the famous sci-fi film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there's also a parent who becomes obsessed. A father becomes obsessed with aliens after an encounter with them. This film also uses light communication, when scientists use lights to communicate with the aliens towards the end of the film. The show also references Poltergeist by communicating through walls just like the family in the film does. There's also a direct reference to the film when we find out Joyce buys tickets to watch the movie with her son. X-Men. Stranger Things gave us a lovable bunch of kids whose only worry starts off as being able to stay up on a school night to play Dungeons and Dragons. A totally important and valid concern, by the way. We also find out that these kids love comic books. Physical copies of comic books were even more valued than they are now, especially in an era when kids didn't have access to the world right in the palm of their hands. Comic books are known for their awesome and fantastic storylines, much like Stranger Things is. So naturally, it makes sense that comic books are not only mentioned, but also referenced directly. In perhaps one of the coolest Easter eggs in the show, Dustin and Will reference a very appropriate X-Men storyline. The first episode of the show, Dustin challenges Will to a bike race.
Race back to my place? Winner gets a comic.
Any comic?
Yeah.
The doomed Will ends up being the winner, and he shouts out that he wants X-Men issue 134. The plot of the issue actually foreshadows the arrival and struggle of Eleven and her powers. The comic book finds Jean Grey mentally snapping and becoming Dark Phoenix, a cosmic entity with dangerous psychic powers far beyond her control. Twin Peaks. Stranger Things had us on a roller coaster right from start to finish, especially when it came to finding Will. At the end, we see Will back home safe and sound. Or is he? Well, he goes to the bathroom and barfs up a slug. Pretty gross, right? But the moment that sent shivers up and down our spines was when he stares at himself in the mirror and the whole room begins to flicker and momentarily becomes the Upside Down. We don't know about you guys, but this moment just about sent us into absolute panic mode. Can't Will just be safe? Poor kid. We totally admire this kid's resolve as he calmly returns to his family. Can you blame him for at least pretending everything is okay for a moment? If this seems eerily familiar, chances are you've seen David Lynch's cult classic TV series Twin Peaks. Will's bathroom moment recalls the last moment of the series in which Agent Cooper has a similar moment in the bathroom. Dale Cooper stares at himself in the mirror before smashing his head into it. As he lifts his head, we see his reflection is that of Bob's. Both Agent Cooper and Will were unable to escape their journey unscathed. Did you binge watch Stranger Things Season 2? Are you also dying for more?
Definitely.
We hear you, we're paddling on that boat with you. The only thing keeping us afloat is the fact that we can re-watch the season. And you all should too, because there are so many hidden Easter eggs and references you may not have noticed. Or some of you eagle-eyed fans might have, in which case we're gonna discuss some of our favorites.
Here's where things get really interesting.
But before you get your waffles ready to go back into the Upside Down and start binge watching again, be sure to push that subscribe button. You'll stay up to date with all our latest videos. Come on, don't be a mouth breather. And it's everyone's favorite time. Can you guess what feature film these emoji are showing? Find out at the end of the video.
D'Artagnan. I'm gonna call you D'Artagnan.
Gremlins. The adorable new pearls aren't the only thing Dustin acquires in Season 2. He also gets a new pet. The slimy critter develops a taste for the sweet nougaty goodness of Three Musketeers bars, and later a taste for flesh, #Justice for Muse. If only he would have known that this little thing would grow up to become a Demodog. But if Dart seems familiar, it's because the little beast shares the same traits as the iconic Gremlins. He avoids sunlight when possible because it hurts him. And just like Gizmo, eating changes things drastically. And like the 3 rules for owning a Mogwai in the Gremlins, Hopper also has 3 basic rules for Eleven, which he calls the don't be stupid rules. The last rule of not going out alone during the sunlight definitely reminds us of needing to keep Gizmo out of the sunlight. Risky Business. Season 2 premiered a few days before Halloween, which was the perfect timing. Naturally, they have a Halloween episode which gave us the horrifying yet wonderful scene when the boys realize they're the only ones dressed up at school. It's a conspiracy, we tell you. There's also the typical teen Halloween party, and if you were wondering what Steve and Nancy were, you're not alone. They said they spent quite some time working on their costumes, but we couldn't figure out Steve's sunglasses, black blazer, and Nancy's white top and black ribbon. Steve's outfit of choice isn't as recognizable as the button-down shirt and tighty whities from the rock and roll scene we all know, but they were dressed up as Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay in the classic 80s film Risky Business. Indiana Jones. The classic will they won't they moment happens when Jonathan and Nancy consider staying in their separate rooms in Murray's house. This totally reminded us of the moment in Indiana Jones Temple of Doom where Willie Scott and Indiana Jones have their own moment where they give in to their feelings. But the iconic hat that Hopper wears all the time is definitely Indy-esque. I mean, his silhouette in the upside down tunnels doesn't get any more Indiana Jones than that, right? And just like Indy, Hopper also goes back to grab his hat, narrowly escaping danger while doing so. And thank goodness, because we can't imagine either of them without their iconic lids. Can you? Aliens. For fans of the Aliens movies, seeing Paul Reiser play Dr. Owen set us up to believe that he was going to betray Will and friends. He played memorable bad guy Burke, who sends Ripley and the Space Marines to find more xenomorphs, knowing very well that they would all probably die in the process. Reiser has similar motives in Stranger Things, but thankfully, he's a far cry from his character in Aliens. The scene where soldiers descend into the tunnels below Hawkins only to meet their demise and be attacked by Demodogs is straight out of Aliens, especially with the body cams, radar blips, the ridiculous outnumbering of soldiers, and the flamethrower burning up the upside down slime and vines. Exorcism of Will Byers. Although Stranger Things doesn't deal with demons, there are similarities between the possession of Will Byers and possession movies, especially the classic The Exorcist. The classic tropes from removing an evil being from an innocent child are all there. The shadow monster possesses Will completely, and Joyce decides to get the creature out by force, even if it means her son has to suffer, temporarily. Tough call, but it had to be done. Instead of having a Bible-quoting father being chilled to the bone, the Duffer brothers turned it upside down and gave us Joyce, Nancy, and Jonathan turning the heat up and sweating. Also, the scene where Joyce is in the Hawkins lab reprimanding the doctors and scientists for not being able to diagnose what's wrong with Will totally resembles The Exorcist. Ellen Burstyn's character also gets angry at the docs for not being able to help with her possessed daughter. Super creepy, isn't it?
Wait, hold up the proton blaster. Alright, and turn to the light.
Ghostbusters. The most obvious reference, of course, was the Ghostbusters, as the boys were dressed as the iconic crew from the film for Halloween. But there were some hidden references you may not have noticed. The first is when the boys are about to go trick-or-treating and we hear Dustin say, "Don't cross the streams." That's a reference to the film when Egon warns everyone to never cross the streams, referring to the proton beams from multiple particle throwers. On Dustin's bedroom wall, you can also see a Ghostbusters certificate of anti-paranormal proficiency. You got that by joining the movie's official fan club. Who are you gonna call? Star Wars. Star Wars changed the face of the film industry forever and became an inspiration for pretty much all movies and shows. Even in modern times, Stranger Things takes a few things from the film franchise. In the episode The Lost Sister, Eleven basically force chokes the man who hurt Mama and Callie across his apartment floor. Her black clothes and badass attitude kind of reminds us of when Anakin crosses over to the dark side. The episode also reminds us of the Dagobah training sequence from Empire Strikes Back. Callie tells Eleven to move the train car and use her anger, just like Yoda told Luke to lift his X-Wing from the swamp using the Force. And just like Luke has a vision of Darth Vader, aka his father in the cave, Elle has a vision of her papa courtesy of Callie. Both Elle and Luke abandon their training once they find out their friends are in danger.
That's the objective. Find the X.
Yeah? What's at the X? Pirate treasure?
The Goonies. Much like E.T., The Goonies was another film that clearly influenced the show. One of the most obvious nods to the film is casting Sean Astin as Joyce's new love interest, Bob. Sean Astin played Mike in The Goonies. He was the leader of the iconic treasure-seeking kids. So it's awesome when his past performance is brought up playfully when Mike Wheeler explains to Bob that they need to find the X on Will's map. Bob asks, "What's at the X? Pirate treasure?" "Not exactly, Bob. Just a suffocating Chief Hopper." Also, seeing the kids in tunnels under Hawkins with a reluctant Steve is also giving us some Goonies feels. The candy bar based relationship between Dustin and Dart, who bond over their love of Three Musketeers bars, reminds us of the friendship between Chunk and Sloth in the Goonies, who bond over a Baby Ruth bar.
All right, I think this is it. 515 Laramie, right?
Yes.
515. Numbers are always important, but in the case of Stranger Things, they hold significant meaning. For instance, 11 is the name of one of the protagonists, so it makes sense that 11 is a special number in the series. For instance, 11 and Chief Hopper's favorite designated meeting time is 5:15, or 515 as 11 says. 5 plus 5 plus 1 equals 11.
Mind-blowing. Come on, you know you're on the best.
515 is also the address of Eleven's mother, who we meet briefly and learn of her tragic past. The number 11 is also relevant to the day where Eleven has her telekinetic tantrum, which is day 326 of being stuck in the cabin. 3 plus 2 plus 6 is 11. Coincidence?
I think not! Life or death situation, what would you pick?
I guess, Reese's Pieces?
Good call. Good call. I'm more of a Mounds guy, but I gotta say, peanut butter and chocolate, come on. Hard to beat that.
E.T. There are a ton of similarities between E.T. and Stranger Things, so many in fact that we could probably make a video on that topic alone. In Season 2, however, the first reference to E.T. comes when Will is being examined by Dr. Owens at Hawkins' lab. He asks Will what his favorite candy is, and he responds with Reese's Pieces, which was E.T.'s favorite candy in the movie. After the film premiered in 1982, the candy became every kid's favorite. Eleven's dress and wig in the first season seem borrowed from E.T. And in Season 2, Eleven raids E.T.'s outfits once more when she dresses up like a ghost when attempting to convince Hopper to let her go trick-or-treating. The ghost sheet outfit is just like E.T.'s costume in the film, don't you think? Jurassic Park. If you were watching the scene where Will and company have to escape the Hawkins lab building and it seemed oddly familiar, you're not alone. While the Demodogs break into the lab and Will, Hopper, Joyce, Bob, Mike, and Dr. Owens go into hiding, they end up losing power. They need to go down into the basement and not only reset the power, but restart the computers. The only one who knows how to speak computer is good guy Bob, and so he volunteers as tribute. Bob has to separate from the rest of the group to turn on the power so that they can all escape. This is just like Jurassic Park, where Ray Arnold has to go at it alone and get the power back on. However, unlike Arnold, Bob is successful in his efforts, but both men pay for their attempts with their lives. Hashtag justice for Bob. Blue hair tie. In Season 1, we see Hopper sporting a woven blue bracelet. It was his daughter's blue hair tie that we see in a flashback. It was endearing that he kept it and pulled it up into his hand during stressful times. Just another reason as to why Jim Hopper is the greatest Papa Bear ever. In flashback scenes, we see what happens to his daughter. After she goes through chemo and loses her hair, we see the blue hair tie on his wrist as he reads to her. So when it came to Season 2, we weren't too shocked to see it still on his wrist. But there's one thing you might not have noticed. At the end of Season 2, Eleven goes to the snowball and dances with Mike. On her wrist is Sarah's blue hair tie, which means she's his daughter now too. The bracelet is his most prized possession, and now Jane Hopper has it. We're not crying, you're crying.
In Stranger Things Season 3, everything on the show got notched up to 11. While the Russians may be trying to pull the strings within the world of the show, the Duffer Brothers use nostalgia to pull at the strings of our hearts. So join Screen Rant as we journey into the Upside Down and back. We'll give you this collection of Easter eggs and things you may have missed in the epic third season of Stranger Things. Stranger Things' third season takes place during the summer of 1985, which ironically happens to be around the same time that a little movie was released to the public. This beloved film launched a franchise that spawned 2 sequels, a cartoon show, a ride, and countless merchandising opportunities. It may just be the most beloved film of the mid-1980s, and it introduced us to the trials and tribulations of the McFly family. Back to the Future. A showing of the film serves as a hiding place for the kids after Dustin and Erica bust Robin and Steve out of the Russian facility. Not only does the Huey Lewis track Workin' for a Livin' harken back to Lewis's Power of Love, which scored the beginning of Back to the Future, there's also a black Kit Kat clock like the one seen in Doc Brown's home. Max travels on a skateboard like Marty's, and a sports car speeds through Starcourt's parking lot, much like Marty's time-traveling trip through the Twin Pines parking lot. The Cineplex was always a hangout for teens through the ages, and if it was attached to a shopping mall, then it was a primo spot for high schooler activity. In Stranger Things, the Starcourt Mall has a Radio Shack and an Orange Julius, which have been harder to find in malls nowadays since both companies had issues staying afloat in recent years. Some audience members who weren't alive in the 80s may think one place, Hot Dog on a Stick, is a made-up establishment. Shockingly, Hot Dog on a Stick is a corn dog joint that populated many malls in the 1980s. Also, there's still 80 takeout locations in existence. Starcourt also hosts what you'd tend to find in your local mall. Burger King, Claire's, The Gap, JCPenney, Walden Books, and a Taco Bell, which is noted as coming soon on a wall behind Max and 11. All these stores are still thriving, even though many malls are starting to shutter across the country. Just as the mall Starcourt gets a lot of airtime this season, the pool also proves to be a nostalgic location too. Many movies in the 80s, like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Caddyshack, featured iconic pool scenes. The 90s also gave us a nostalgic film about kids growing up together called The Sandlot, and that film has a well-known pool scene too. With low-angle pool surface shots and bright colors, the pool scene harkens back to many a stereotypical coming-of-age tale, right down to the pool visitors ogling a scantily clad person with a fit bod. This time, Stranger Things swaps the usual gender being ogled by showing the older women at the pool all staring at lifeguard Billy Hargrove. For a pudgy guy with his own set of issues, Hopper is often called upon to maintain order in the series. He's generally an all-around tough guy, and he shows this when he puts Mayor Klein's finger in a cigar cutter. Sure, he doesn't actually cut off the finger, but the scene is reminiscent of Mayor actor Cary Elwes' role in the original Saw film. In that film, we witnessed Cary Elwes' character to literally, spoiler alert, saw off his own foot. With all the connections this show makes to other films, it's highly likely that this moment is a reference to the highly popular horror franchise, even though Stranger Things tends to wink at less violent franchises. In another Fast Times at Ridgemont High pool reference, Dustin says his girlfriend is hotter than Phoebe Cates. Well, she's famous for the scene from Ridgemont High where she rises out of the pool in a Baywatch-esque red bathing suit. During the video store scene in the final episode, Steve actually holds up a cardboard cutout of Cates.
Oh, Fast Times. Fast Times. Ever heard of it? Top 3 for me, Kate.
And yeah, Cates was a big deal in the 80s, appearing not only in Cameron Crowe's popular film about high school hijinks at Ridgemont, but also in the hit 1984 flick Gremlins. There's yet another Gremlins and Phoebe Cates connection to be found in Stranger Things when Dustin makes an electricity-powered hammer. Really, it's a gizmo-covered, Rube Goldberg-styled invention that would fit right in with any 80s movie. Playwright Anton Chekhov argued that every element introduced in a story should play a part in the telling of said story. So if you were to show the audience that a gun is hanging on the wall of a room, that gun better be fired at some point later in the story. In Season 3 of Stranger Things, the shopping mall is basically Chekhov's gun. The kids hang out there, they go on shopping sprees, and we, the audience, practically become regular shoppers there. So it's only natural that this location becomes the setting for major events in the series. Particularly the showdown with the Mind Flayer, which basically plays out like an homage to the original Dawn of the Dead. The 1978 zombie film is set inside a mall and features a character sliding down the narrow aisle between two adjacent escalators. Bonus points to this sequence for featuring characters with similar afflictions to the victims from Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The movie theater also features some nods to classic 80s films. We've already talked about the Back to the Future connections prevalent throughout the season, but there's also posters for Cocoon, another flick released in 1985. The movie theater gives us an extra throwback in the form of the vintage Our Feature Presentation card, which plays on the screen before the movie starts. This particular feature presentation card was in use throughout much of the 80s and has even shown up in other more recent films by Quentin Tarantino, himself a filmmaker who loves to load his movies with Easter eggs and throwback moments. Of course, the Duffer Brothers had to throw in a reference to New Coke. Throughout the 80s, Coke went crazy, supplying its consumers with different versions of its product to boost sales. Diet Coke first came out during this era, in 1982 to be precise. While Diet Coke proved to be a major hit, New Coke was a flop. In 1985, the Coca-Cola Company was facing the heat from Pepsi's positive sales. So they debuted a new flavor that tested really well. About 90% of those involved in the taste test loved the new formula. But longtime Coke drinkers felt so alienated by the new flavor, their protests helped Coke see a dip in the sales and the company brought the old flavor back. The ad hype for New Coke was so huge that it makes sense for the Stranger Things team to include it heavily in the show.
Sweeter, bolder, better. You're insane.
Season 1 of the show takes place around Christmas time, Season 2 takes place on Halloween, and Season 3 capitalizes on the 4th of July. Yeah, the summer holiday is a huge time for blockbuster releases and teen hijinks, so the setting makes perfect sense. If you've been keeping track, there absolutely seems to be a theme with the time setting of each season. In Season 3, Mike brings up the fact that he's coming to visit Eleven on Thanksgiving. So we can only assume that the next installment of this series will occur around Turkey Day. When the show starts taking place during Arbor Day, we'll know the Duffer Brothers will have started running out of ideas. Farrah Fawcett's untimely passing may have been overshadowed by the passing of the King of Pop. They both died on the same day. But Farrah Fawcett, the original Charlie's Angel, lives on in Stranger Things. Sure, she's been referenced by Steve before, and we know he uses some puffs of Farrah's hairspray for his own styling needs. It's this same bottle that Dustin holds when he needs to defend himself. This 80s era Easter egg is just another detail proving that the Duffer Brothers and their design team give the characters the right props and costumes to keep things authentic to the time period. As pop culture took over more and more of the zeitgeist, the 1980s was a time when every item in your house could be considered product placement. Naturally, since cereals are an easy thing for kids to eat before school, the breakfast option was one of the most commercialized. And Season 3 of Stranger Things includes some quick shots of store shelves holding Mr. T and Ghostbuster cereals. Let's face it, there's been crazier cereal tie-ins before. We've had Urkelos, E.T. cereal, and processed wheat made to look like just about any superhero you could imagine. Interestingly, one of the earliest video game breakfasts was the Nintendo cereal system. We'd think they would have just called it Nintendo's. The big movies and TV shows of the 80s did more than impact how people acted and how they ate. It also had a huge influence on the way people dressed. Perhaps there's no better example in Stranger Things than Hopper's Magnum P.I. style. The hit TV show featured a mustachioed Tom Selleck as the titular character, a hip investigator who lived in a tropical locale and wore colorful Hawaiian shirts. Hopper matches Selleck right down to the mustache. Another show that gets a shout out is the one about the place where everybody knows your name. Cheers is everyone's favorite watering hole. It's Joyce's go-to show. She watches it when she's home alone, and the relationship between Cheers' leads, Sam and Diane, seems fairly similar to the certain will they or won't they relationship on Stranger Things.
Tear off those clothes and get it over with already!
Prometheum is referenced in this season of the show, and no, it doesn't have anything to do with the Ridley Scott movie/Alien prequel Prometheus. Actually, it's much like any other unbelievable substance, like unobtainium. Prometheum is used in DC Comics by Cyborg's dad in order to make Cyborg become, well, Cyborg. While it's used in comics, it also is a highly rare radioactive element with only up to around 600 grams of the stuff ever on Earth at any given time. The substance in Stranger Things actually looks fairly similar to the ooze in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but TMNT 2: The Secret of the Ooze didn't come out until 1991, long after the Stranger Things kids snuck into that Russian laboratory. While Jurassic Park wasn't released until 1993, the film had a huge impact on kids of the time and continues to put the special effects in even modern movies to shame. So it makes sense that the Duffer Brothers would also nod to Spielberg's epic dino film in their sci-fi nostalgia fest of a show. Particular Jurassic Park moments include Mayor Klein's line when he showcases his carnival and says "spared no expense," which John Hammond used to describe pretty much everything in the film. Shortly after this, the monster moves through the woods in much the same way the T-Rex ambles in Jurassic Park. Murray Bowman, as played by Brett Gelman, is the resident matchmaker of Hawkins, Indiana. And while the magic of the show tends to be associated with Eleven and the creatures connected to the Upside Down, Murray does manage to inspire Joyce to get with Hopper, or at least ask him out. This mirrors a scene from Season 2 in which Murray compels Nancy and Jonathan to get together. If you ever need a couples therapist, you just need to get Murray in your life. If your relationship is doing just fine, then consider having him serve as your third wheel. The big evil Russian is often compared to Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator. He seems ruthless, emotionless, and cold, driven to complete his mission at all costs. Grigori is your typical 80s-styled villain as he's tracking down Hopper, but it's the wounds he receives in the industrial setting that directly correlate with Schwarzenegger's classic Cyborg from Hell character. When his face gets torn up towards the end, his gashes match those of Arnold's in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. But when Grigori ends up going into the machine that makes the gate, his final moment seems more akin to that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where the German mechanic ends up in that propeller. Even the place where Dustin met Susie is a reference to something else. Camp Nowhere can be considered a nod to the Christopher Lloyd film of the same name from the mid-90s. Also starring Thomas F. Wilson, who played Biff in Back to the Future, Camp Nowhere features Christopher Lloyd as the facilitator of a summer camp for kids where no adults or counselors are in charge. By the time the mid-credits scene rolls around, we think most of our characters' troubles are resolved. Sure, Hopper exploded in that blast, but our problems seem to have been fixed for the time being. Then we're treated to a mid-credits scene in which the Russians feed a prisoner to a Demogorgon. Before this, they discuss another prisoner in their custody. But who might this second prisoner be? Although they're not named in this particular scene, and although we don't know for sure until the 4th season comes out, it's plausible that this prisoner is Hopper, especially since they reference an American. It's just the type of tease any savvy writing team would concoct to keep the audience on edge until the next season airs. Weird Al is a pop culture icon, and his path to stardom can be traced back to the early 80s. So it's only appropriate that one of the song parody king's earliest tunes makes a cameo appearance during the season. In 1979, Weird Al Yankovic wrote My Bologna, a parody of the Knack's My Sharona, while he attended California Polytechnic State University. He recorded it in a bathroom, and while it may have been of a lesser sound quality than his later material, it helped launch his career. And it made enough of a mark for Stranger Things science teacher and AV club manager Mr. Clark to sing it during an episode. In another episode, Dustin can be seen wearing a Weird Al t-shirt. This one's a much older reference than their usual contemporary 80s nods. When Nancy calls Jonathan very early in the morning, he explains that he was up super late with Fagin and the gang. For those not up to date on their Charles Dickens references, Fagin was an immoral man who led a group of pickpocketing children in Oliver Twist. The Dickens novel was first published in the late 1830s, but has been adapted for film and television many times. The musical version won the Best Picture Oscar in 1968, around the time many of the younger Stranger Things characters were born. And then in 1982, a TV version of the story featured Tim Curry and George C. Scott. With all the crazy sets and costumes that the actors have at their disposal, we imagine the Stranger Things set is basically one big toy box. And speaking of toys, Dustin's playthings are basically a laundry list of 80s Easter eggs all to themselves. Among Dustin's items, there's an Ultra Magnus Transformer, an R2-D2, and a monkey figurine that clangs its cymbals. 11 brings Dustin's toys to life, just like how the Duffer Brothers are breathing new life into our 80s memories. There's also arguably a reference to the film Making Contact. In that movie, similar toys are brought to life in a similar fashion. Coincidence? We think not. Speaking of Making Contact, there's a song in the Season 1 soundtrack called Making Contact. It may be a purposeful connection to the mid-80s film, but it's worth noting that any encounter with the unknown will often be described as some sort of contact-making event. And let's face it, there's a lot of encounters with unknown entities in this show. What we do know is that the guys behind each season's soundtrack, composers Michael Stein and Kyle Dixon, do make a cameo appearance in Season 3. They can be seen browsing the cassettes at Family Video. They get to relive one of America's forgotten Friday night pastimes, looking through the racks of a video rental store. The 80s was the era when the slasher film went mainstream. Franchises like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street got sequel after sequel. Also iconic, the Halloween series. The first two Halloween films both managed to keep a franchise going that still lives on to this day. You might notice that the visual styles of the hospital scenes in Stranger Things look familiar, and that's because the Duffer Brothers appear to have taken a page or two out of Halloween 2's book. The 1981 film's Hospital Haddonfield Memorial also shares initials and a similar logo with its Stranger Things doppelganger Hawkins Memorial. Although Die Hard came out in 1988, a full 3 years after the time period of Season 3, no 80s homage is complete without a reference to the action-packed thriller set at Nakatomi Plaza. Die Hard is a standard for over-the-top action flicks with loads of heart. There are set pieces on rooftops, nail-biting sequences featuring John McClane hanging off the side of the building, and claustrophobic moments in which Bruce Willis's character squeezes himself through the building's ventilation system. We're treated to a similar sequence in the Starcourt vents. Also, when Hopper gets the jump on Grigori and holds his firearm to the Russian responds, "You're a policeman. Policemen have rules." A similar line is uttered in the Bruce Willis classic. Finally, we get some flourishes of Sam Raimi style in the latest Stranger Things season as well. It wouldn't be a horror homage if there weren't some nods to the adventures of Ash, the lead character of the Evil Dead series. Like Ash, Nancy and Jonathan run into the shed to load up on makeshift weapons. The Raimi-esque visual style includes the smash cuts as Nancy and Jonathan grabs item in the shed, the shaky camera footage chronicling this event, and ultimately the destruction of the cabin. There may not be any Bruce Campbell cameos in this season, but that sure would have made things extra groovy. Cobra Kai has landed on Netflix, and now everyone wants to be a true Cobra. Well, if you want to call yourself a Cobra, here are 25 facts about Cobra Kai that you need. There are a lot of remakes, reboots, and long-awaited sequels out there that don't always seem to be very proud of their source material. We've all seen a movie that's based on something popular from the 80s that misses the entire point of why the property was great in the first place. Well, Cobra Kai is definitely not one of those shows. Cobra Kai loves the Karate Kid so much that it actually shows us more of it than we got in the movie. That's right, if something about that LaRusso versus Lawrence fight seemed new to you, that's because it was. There was a lot of footage from the original that got left on the cutting room floor. What you see of the famous final match in the series is vintage Karate Kid repurposed for the new series. Cobra Kai does a fantastic job of setting itself up as the next generation of the Karate Kid franchise. One of the coolest ideas that the show plays around with is that Daniel LaRusso is now the new Mr. Miyagi. He uses bonsai trees in his advertisements, makes Japanese food, and even opens up his own dojo to honor his former master. He even uses the same wax-on, wax-off method of training. The main reason that this works is that LaRusso seems to be about Miyagi's age now. Only that's not entirely accurate. Ralph Macchio is actually 5 years older than Pat Morita was during the original film. Apparently, selling cars and doing karate is really good for the skin. The television show goes to great lengths to show that things have changed drastically for LaRusso and Lawrence since the first movie came out. In the original film, LaRusso was the scrappy poor kid who moved into a cheap apartment with his mother. Lawrence, on the other hand, was the overprivileged rich kid who became LaRusso's nemesis. Only now, the two have switched, with LaRusso rolling in the big bucks while Lawrence struggles just to pay rent. If you look closely, you can see that they've even designed Lawrence's apartment to look much like the LaRusso family home in the original. It's that level of care and attention to detail that truly makes Cobra Kai a worthy successor to the original. For years, there was an incredibly popular fan theory that recontextualized every single event in The Karate Kid. You see, the original film was framed around Daniel's perspective. We saw him struggle to fit into a new school, seeing as he was a poor kid from New Jersey. Then, things got better when he met the beautiful Allie. Of course, that's when things took a turn, and he started getting bullied by Lawrence and the Cobra Kais to the point that he had to learn karate to defend himself. Well, the fan theory actually stated that LaRusso was actually the villain the whole time. He starts almost every confrontation with Lawrence and the Cobras. He tried to take Johnny's girl. He even used an illegal kick to win in the end. Cobra Kai not only brought up this theory, but built a show around it. Who do you think is the villain? The Karate Kid is one of those movies that is so classic that literally every aspect of it is iconic. Cobra Kai goes to great lengths to recreate as much of that magic as is possible. Everything from the Cobra uniforms to the dojo fits the spirit of the original film perfectly. It is a masterclass on how to recreate a world that was formed decades ago and fit it to the spirit of the modern day. That being said, some things you just can't recreate. Sometimes the best way to bring back the spirit of the past is to have something from the past as a totem. That's why it is so cool that Daniel LaRusso's headband that he uses as a symbol for his return to karate is actually the headband from the original movie. You can't get better than that. Cobra Kai Season 1 was so great that it almost seemed impossible for the second season to improve upon it. The series followed the formula that made The Karate Kid such an instant classic, but it came at the story from an entirely new perspective that makes you rethink every single scene of the original film. That's why it was so impressive that Season 2 blew the original one away. One of the coolest ways it did this was by having the original Cobras reunite. It was tragic that Tommy ended up passing away, but what was more tragic is that actor Rob Garrison, who played Tommy, passed away shortly after the episode was released. Let's face it, we all love catching up with Johnny and Daniel after so many years, but Cobra Kai would have utterly failed if it didn't deliver a compelling new generation of fighters to carry on their legacy. That is not an easy task, as each of these characters had to perform complex fight scenes that I know I couldn't handle. Luckily, many of the members of the cast were martial artists or had experience in dance choreography to help with the stunts. The actor who plays Miguel studies Shotokan karate, for instance, which probably helps with those savage Cobra Kai moves that he unleashes upon his enemies. I wonder if any of them have started to incorporate the Cobra Kai philosophy into their martial arts. If so, I'd hate to be their competition. It often seems like Daniel LaRusso has the perfect life. He's got a beautiful wife and kids, his car dealership is amazing, and honestly, he looks so young that you'd never realize that the actress who plays his wife is a full 20 years younger than he is. Things at the LaRusso home aren't always perfect, though. As we saw in Season 1, tensions between his wife and mother tend to run pretty hot. Daniel struggles to deal with this, considering how great a mom she was way back in the original movie. To drive this point home, the series made sure to get the original actress Randy Heller back for the new series. There are few beefs in the history of film that run as deep as the one between Daniel LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence. These two are enemies for the ages, so much so that they managed to make an entire series around the two, reigniting the beef decades later. So how crazy is it to find out that real-life actors Ralph Macchio and William Zabka were friends? Yes, the two confirmed that while their characters may have hated each other, the two bonded quite a lot over the years. Evidently, that bond grew deeper when the actor who played Mr. Miyagi, Pat Morita, sadly passed away. Still though, something about it doesn't sit right. It'd be like finding out that Batman and the Joker actually owned a bed and breakfast together in Gotham City. The wait between The Karate Kid and Cobra Kai was a long time for fans of the series to see William Zabka and Ralph Macchio reunite. That being said, Cobra Kai wasn't actually the first series to feature the pair coming back together. In an episode of the sitcom How I Met Your Mother, Barney Stinson reveals that he believes Johnny Lawrence to be the real Karate Kid while Daniel LaRusso is the villain. That's why it was so hilarious to see Ralph Macchio crash his bachelor party with a personality that mirrored Barney's. What was even better was the eventual reveal that the party clown his friends got him was actually William Zabka all along. You just know Barney's new favorite show is Cobra Kai. The Karate Kid was great, but a series can only rest on the laurels of its original property for so long. The only way a sequel actually proves its worth is by bringing something new to the table. That's why Cobra Kai's trademark 80s nostalgia and hard-cutting wit work well for the franchise. It's no surprise that the creator of the series, Josh Heald, got his start with this exact kind of wit. He was the writer for the Hot Tub Time Machine movie, which also featured plenty of throwback 80s humor and even Johnny Lawrence himself, William Zabka. While the second Hot Tub Time Machine film may have failed to recapture the magic of the original, Heald wisely decided to pivot to television where Cobra Kai has thrived. What 80s property should he hit next? Johnny Lawrence had a rough time after The Karate Kid. His life seemed to just go from one disaster to the next as he failed at most of his jobs, as a father and as a husband to his wife Shannon. We see Shannon several times over the series, and let's just say that things probably worked out better for Johnny in the long run here. What's cool about Shannon is that this isn't the first time her and Zabka have appeared together. You see, in Hot Tub Time Machine, Tiora Baird also played Zabka's wife. We may not get to see much of their marriage in Cobra Kai, but at least this is something. Of all the kids in The Karate Kid who don't appear in the series, there is one who casts the largest shadow. That is, of course, the ex-girlfriend of both Johnny Lawrence and Daniel LaRusso, Allie. This young beauty seems to have broken both men in different ways, as both seem to look back on their time with her with wistful longing, even if one of them is happily married. For Johnny, it seems like things run deeper. In many ways, she's the one that got away. So that's why it's no surprise that it's being hinted around that Elizabeth Shue may reappear for Cobra Kai. Hey, she still looked good enough to seduce Homelander and the boys, so why not? While Cobra Kai pays a lot of respect to the original Karate Kid movie, it doesn't seem to look as favorably upon the various sequels in the series. I mean, there were several movies and a reboot long before Johnny Lawrence reopened his dojo. I doubt we'll ever hear a reference to the Jaden Smith movie. That being said, it looks like we might see some characters from the first sequel, The Karate Kid Part 2. Daniel LaRusso is said to be returning to Okinawa, and I hope he runs into one of his other big rivals, Chozen. In that film, Chozen was less a martial arts rival than he was a thug who Daniel had to take down. Round 2, anyone? The Karate Kid had a lot of style, even if we're not talking about those sweet Cobra Kai outfits. Seriously though, where do I get one of those? Anyway, one of the coolest things in the original movie was the car that Daniel got to drive around in. He may have had to wax on, wax off the vehicle for Mr. Miyagi, but it was totally worth it in the end. What poor kid doesn't want to cruise around in a sweet ride he'd normally never get to try out? That's probably a big part of the reason why he became a car salesman. This is further exemplified by the exact same car appearing in the series. The karate may have taught him balance, but that car gave Daniel LaRusso a career. It's kind of funny to think back on the first episode where Lawrence addressed the Cobra Kai crowd. At that time, they thought that his method of teaching was insane and more than a bit outdated. To be fair, even he has admitted that. To a point. That attitude about their sensei didn't last long though. As the characters got more and more into Cobra Kai, you can see that their clothing changed as well. Many times throughout the series, the Cobras wear their Cobra Kai colors to signify their allegiance to Sensei Lawrence and Cobra Kai at all times. At the beginning of the series, Eli was a shy kid with an awkward scar that made him feel like a freak. Kids bullied him for it, and it seemed like he would never be accepted for anything else. If you rewatch that first episode, it's actually shocking how that shy, embarrassed kid is compared to who he would become. That all changed when Lawrence pushed him so hard that he reinvented his entire personality. He got a giant mohawk, a dramatic back tattoo, and a fierce new attitude. Over the run of the show, his scar has slowly faded as well, symbolizing how much he's grown past it. In many ways, Eli is gone. There is only Hawk. In the first episode of the series, Lawrence is shown watching a movie that looks like a cheap ripoff of Top Gun. To be fair, that is the exact type of movie that you know the adult Johnny Lawrence would be all about. That film is called Iron Eagle, and believe it or not, it actually released in 1986, the same year as Top Gun and 2 years after The Karate Kid. It also featured a former Cobra Kai. Rob Garrison, who played Tommy in The Karate Kid and Cobra Kai, had a small role in Iron Eagle as Packer. Man, they really went all out on the Cobra Kai references. There was something incredibly awesome about the original Cobras reuniting after all these years. Sure, it's been great to see Johnny Lawrence reclaim some of his past glory, but that doesn't compare to watching him reunite with his crew from back in the day. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see the entire crew back together. In the show, the explanation is that Dutch was in jail. The real reason is that actor Chad McQueen left acting to become a race car driver and then started McQueen Racing LLC. Honestly, turning down a chance at a big Hollywood comeback for your racing company is still a pretty Cobra Kai thing to do. There are a lot of subtle ways that Cobra Kai references the differences between longtime rivals Daniel LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence. They have different attitudes, different incomes, and completely different fighting styles. In many ways, these two started off as polar opposites and only became more different as time went by. That's why it's so interesting to see the really small nods the show makes to this. Throughout the series, Lawrence is shown to favor cheap beer even when he gets some money. In contrast, Daniel will often drink a martini or a much more expensive beer to show how classy he is by comparison. Man, these guys can't even agree on alcohol. Johnny Lawrence and Daniel LaRusso were icons of the 1980s, so it only seems right that the two characters would still be trapped in that decade, even in the 21st century. The running joke for Lawrence is that he seems to have resisted all technological advancements almost as if he had a phobia against them. He barely knows what a website is, has no knowledge of Facebook, and struggles to make a commercial. In sharp contrast, LaRusso's entire home is built around technology, but he seems to hate it. He is constantly trying to get his kids away from their devices and purposefully trains in the woods where he gets no cell reception. Things did not start well for Johnny when he started the Cobra Kai dojo. The clients didn't exactly come pouring in until Miguel showed his skills off to the entire cafeteria. No, at first it seemed like he would barely be able to keep the place running for a month. That was even before LaRusso conspired to get his rent hiked up. The first thing Johnny did was rent his dojo out as a yoga studio to sublet the rent. This was hilarious because yoga represents everything that Cobra Kai stands against. Well, you'd think so anyway. What was the first pose they did in the studio? The Cobra! It's clear that Lawrence and LaRusso have gone in different directions, but the same can be said for their actors William Zabka and Ralph Macchio. The success of The Karate Kid kept Macchio working in some fashion for decades, most recently on HBO's The Deuce. Zabka, however, had a career much like Lawrence's. Before Cobra Kai, it seemed like his acting days were more or less done. That would make Cobra Kai a true resurgence for both character and actor. Never count a true Cobra out. Okay, I gotta be straight up about this one. It's gonna hurt at first, but I promise it has a happy ending. During The Karate Kid, Johnny Lawrence may have known all sorts of sick Cobra Kai moves, but that doesn't mean that the actor did. Yes, I am sorry to tell you, but William Zabka actually wasn't a martial artist during the filming of the movie. All of that did change, however. After the film, Zabka trained extensively in karate. He did have to retrain to get back into fighting shape for Cobra Kai, but the skills were all there. All I want to know is whether he trained in a normal gi or his Cobra Kai uniform. I have some really great news for you Cobra Kai fans out there. It's not good enough that the show moved to Netflix. No, it has actually been renewed for Season 3. The third run of the popular series has already been shot and will release sometime in 2021. That means that we'll be taught the core principles of Cobra Kai for years. Strike first, strike hard, no mercy.
Ah, young grasshopper. You want to see 25 things you missed in Cobra Kai? Well, you came to the right dojo, the Screen Rant Dough. So, like everyone else, us included, you've binged through Season 3 of Cobra Kai, right? I mean, what else is there to do during a pandemic? Now, like me, after not having a coffee for 3 hours, you are having some serious withdrawal symptoms. Well, don't worry. We've got you covered. We are going to take a look at 25 things you might have missed in Cobra Kai Season 3, including Easter eggs to the original movies, awesome behind-the-scenes anecdotes, and even references to some internet theories.
Are you sure this is right?
So let's show no fear and dive right into some Season 3 details. And beware, spoilers will strike first. So if you haven't seen Season 3 yet, we suggest coming back when you have. Let's break the ice by taking a look at the Break the Ice Easter egg. In Okinawa, Daniel and Kumiko sit and share a cocktail together at a local bar. The ice provided for said drinks is smashed out of large blocks. Now, if you are a massive Karate Kid fan, this practice may seem somewhat familiar to you. That's because Daniel smashes ice in a similar fashion in the Karate Kid Part 2, where he becomes involved in a wager with Mr. Miyagi's arch-nemesis Sato and his student Chozen. I think I'm going to stick with getting my ice out of an ice tray. It's much easier. Speaking of Chozen, he made his long-awaited return in Season 3, with the show filling in the blanks since his fight with Daniel in Karate Kid 2 to his return in Cobra Kai. Daniel, on his return to Okinawa, reunites with his bitter foe, Chozen, who he hasn't seen for 30 years. Chozen, in an Easter egg to his Uncle Sato, pretends to still hate Daniel, leading us to believe he is still the villain.
Can I have a drink? I don't drink.
But we soon learn that Chozen is actually a changed man and has even been running the Miyagi-Do and teaching there as a sensei. Chozen also states in a heartwarming story that he was suicidal after the events of Karate Kid 2 until Sato helped him to see the light and turn his life around. Chozen also seeks forgiveness and friendship from Kumiko, and eventually Daniel also forgives him and the two end up leaving on good terms, similar to the relationship between Miyagi and Sato in Part 2. But of course, the biggest return to take place in Season 3 is Elizabeth Shue reprising her character of Allie Mills. Her introduction to the show had been teased since Season 2, so although it wasn't shocking to see her return, it was still an undoubtedly epic moment. But no one knew that Shue would be reprising the character for definite until the very last moment, with Ralph Macchio saying he didn't know she was returning till he received the script.
Why didn't you tell me about this at lunch?
He also said that there was a backup plan in place in case she didn't return, and that they would discover it was actually her husband doing the back and forth with Johnny, which, to be honest, would have been quite strange. Thankfully, they didn't do this, and we got to see Allie back in the flesh. Another, albeit more obscure return, was one you truly might not have noticed. Daniel's journey to Okinawa was initially to help refresh his automobile business's relationship with Diona Motors, but along the way he takes a stroll down nostalgia way. At one point, though, these two roads converge when he meets up with their senior vice president of sales for Diona International. And who should be the senior vice president? None other than Yuna, aka the girl bellringer, who Daniel saved from a typhoon in Part 2, and is even played by the same actress, Tracy Taguchi. It's another heartwarming moment, as well as a great Easter egg, and is karma truly at its finest. You can never underestimate the power of a good tea.
Sick of tea? That's like being sick of breathing.
Daniel LaRusso also seems to understand the importance of tea, as he meets up and catches up with Kumiko after spending decades apart. Before they have their ice-cold cocktails, they share a hot pot of tea. Like the ice for the cocktails, this too is a reference to Karate Kid Part 2 and the movie's famous tea ceremony. As I said, you really can't underestimate the power of a good tea. Have you ever gotten so mad you've just punched through a car window?
Give me the goddamn page!
Well, in the Karate Kid world, it seems like a sensei tradition to punch through a car's window. In Season 3 of Cobra Kai, we see Daniel doing the apparently time-honored tradition, just like his mentor's enemy Kreese, who ended up breaking car windows as he tried to punch Mr. Miyagi in the beginning of the Karate Kid Part 2. The Cobra Kai outfit are known for their memorable mantras and sayings, and even if you don't agree with them, I'm sure you can remember them. Like seriously, when I say strike first, who doesn't say the words strike hard, no mercy afterwards?
I can't hear you! Strike first, strike hard, no mercy, sir!
But there was a mantra you might have missed in Season 3. As Daniel enters the Cobra Kai dojo in the first episode of Season 3, Aftermath, he sees the mantra, "Fear does not exist," written on the wall. This was Kreese's mantra while training students in the original Karate Kid movie.
Fear does not exist in this dojo, does it? No, Sensei!
We have mentioned a few notable appearances in Season 3 already, but there was one major one to happen at the end of the season, although they didn't actually appear on screen. In the final moments of Season 3, we see Kreese making a phone call to someone he hasn't seen in a long time. Although he doesn't see the person he is talking to, we can say with relative certainty that he was talking to Terry Silver. Silver is a major Cobra Kai benefactor and served as the main antagonist for the Karate Kid Part 3.
A man can't stand. You can't fight.
Silver was also Kreese's old friend during their time serving in the Vietnam War, and we see Kreese's time in Vietnam during a flashback. We even see him saving a guy named Twig, who their commanding officer calls Silver. I wonder if they're setting something up for season 4. It's a well-known fact that all the coolest people have a cardboard cutout of themselves, right? No? Just me? Okay, well, anyway, Daniel comes across a cutout of Kreese because he's cool like that. Now, while it isn't the exact same cutout from the original movies, Daniel does come across a cutout of Kreese in both Karate Kid Part 1 and Part 3, because as I said, cool guys have cardboard cutouts of themselves. Now, while Chozen and Daniel may have let bygones be bygones, that doesn't mean that they didn't step back into their fighting selves, just like they did in Karate Kid Part 2, even if this time they're not enemies. But as the two go through the motions, the fight ends in a familiar fashion, with Chozen honking Daniel's nose. Honk! A move Miyagi performed on Kreese in Part 2. Some of the best moments of the original Karate Kid movie come through Miyagi's abstract and often dangerous methods of teaching. One of these moments is the time Miyagi teaches Daniel how to balance by standing on the bow of a small rowboat. Season 3 of Cobra Kai pays reference to this when Daniel and Sam have a father and daughter moment when they hit the water and the two make a joke about whether or not Daniel will make Sam stand on the bow of the boat.
Is that why you brought me here? To trick me into doing karate?
Well, what? No, not at all. This has nothing to do with that.
Speaking of Miyagi and his infinite wisdom, one of the most famous sayings among many is the line,
"No such thing, bad student, only bad teacher."
They pay homage to this line in Cobra Kai when Kreese echoes the sentiment, saying,
"Because you know what they say. There's no such thing as a bad student."
But Kreese doesn't just pay reference to Miyagi's lines, but also to his very own dialogue. As testosterone flares between Kreese and Daniel, Kreese says,
"This time, Johnny and I will finish it once and for all."
Which is certainly a reference to the moment in the final climax of the original movie where Kreese yells at Johnny to finish him. Yeah, I wonder how that turned out. Like cool guys have cardboard cutouts of themselves, everyone knows there is no better place to go on a first date than a mini golf course. No?
Am I so out of touch?
Golf and stuff is an important part of both Cobra Kai and the original Karate Kid series. It's where Ali and Daniel go out on a date, and it's the same place where Miguel and Sam also go out on a first date. Ali and Johnny also go out there in Season 3, and you can even hear the song Feel the Night in the background, the same song from Daniel and Ali's date from the original movie. Now, as we have already mentioned, Daniel's trip to Okinawa is a literal journey down memory lane with Easter eggs aplenty. Another one we see is the return of the house from Karate Kid Part 2, which Kimiko has now inherited from her Aunt Yuki. It's almost as if the trip to Okinawa was just for the purpose of Easter eggs and callbacks or something. For a supposedly non-violent sport, soccer has its fair share of scuffles and fighting, even if it is sometimes rather melodramatic. Therefore, it is the perfect place for Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do to work out their differences, and the two opposing factions end up fighting on the soccer field. This is a direct reference to the original movie where Daniel got into a scuffle with Cobra Kai. Maybe they should just stick to soccer next time. One of the best things about Cobra Kai is that it has added a long list of complexities to the central characters and blurred the lines between right and wrong and good and bad. This is reinforced further in relation to Ali's return. In the second movie, Ali is written out in one line where Daniel says she crashed his car and left him for a guy from UCLA.
She tells me that she's just fallen in love with some football player.
Ali shows it's a little more complex than that though upon her return to Cobra Kai, saying that she was just talking to someone from UCLA when Daniel freaked out and became jealous. I know this isn't just me that thinks this, but Daniel really isn't the hero of this story. But you know, more on that later on. Now on to one of the tastier Easter eggs and coolest pieces of trivia. In another piece of loaded Kreese dialogue, Kreese says, "Let me tell you about your dad. He was always a scrapper.
But the moment I knew he was the real deal was his first All Valley.
He made the quarters, but he drew a kid named Vidal." Now, Johnny defeats Vidal in the 1984 All Valley tournament to make it to the finals, but that's not the fight Kreese is referencing here. He is paying reference to Johnny's first year of competition in 1981, when he first went up against Vidal. But what makes this more interesting is that the actor behind Vidal is attributed to the infamous crane kick on IMDb. You know, the illegal move where Daniel knocks out Johnny? That one. Now, as you know, Johnny uses Facebook to get back in touch with Allie, but he also has some Easter egg-worthy Facebook friends. Look carefully and you will see he is friends with Shane Keller and Mallory Yund, both of whom are producers on the show. Ah, poor naive Johnny. Never befriend your bosses on social media. It never goes well. Trust me. Like golf and stuff, skeleton outfits also have a constant importance in both Cobra Kai and The Karate Kid. In the original movie, Johnny and the Cobra Kai crew can all be seen wearing those infamous skeleton costumes during Halloween. Now, while the skeleton costume is referenced early on in Cobra Kai, with Miguel wearing a similar costume in the show, they also pay reference to the skeleton costume in Season 3. When Cobra Kai invades LaRusso's home in the big climax of Season 3, can you guess what one of them is wearing? Yep, you guessed it. Look closely enough at Tori's sweater and of course, you will see skeleton bones.
You better watch your back.
Now, this next Easter egg might just be us looking too far into things, but knowing how the minds behind Cobra Kai operate, we are pretty sure that this is a very deliberate Easter egg. While at the SDJC, we see Robbie reading a copy of the literary classic Lord of the Flies, which on the surface doesn't have many parallels with Cobra Kai, unless the show is going to take a very dark turn down the road. But is it probably a very wink wink nudge nudge to the maestro, Mr. Miyagi? Because who is the lord at catching flies with chopsticks? Yep, Mr. Miyagi. Okay, maybe this one is a stretch, but seriously, I'm not putting it past them to have made that an Easter egg, unless Robbie just happens to be a fan of the classics. No offense, but that is kind of unlikely. One of the most famous objects to be introduced in The Karate Kid Part 2 is the Okinawa hand drum, which is a very real traditional music item. But since it was in Part 2, it has very much been linked with the franchise. In Part 2, Daniel is inspired by the drums in his fight with Chozen and even uses the drum techniques to eventually defeat him. Seeing how important it is to the franchise, it is therefore no surprise then that the item makes an appearance in Cobra Kai when Miguel comes across it. Sam even shows Miguel the famous hand trick that Miyagi once taught Daniel back in the day and basically passes down the torch. Or drum, in this case.
Is that my drum in your pocket?
Hawk's wardrobe pays many callbacks to the original franchise, and to be honest, so does Hawk in general, with him riding on a motorbike similar to the Cobra Kai crew in the original movie. But focusing more on his wardrobe for a second, we see Hawk wearing a bright red jacket in Season 3, which is very reminiscent of the one worn by Johnny in the original movie. Now, we have already mentioned it, but there has been a constant debate surrounding the legality of the crane kick that Daniel uses on Johnny at the end of the movie. You already know my thoughts on the subject. Now, Cobra Kai has never shied away from this debate and even makes fun of it in the very first episode, where Johnny also brings into question the move's legality.
It was an illegal kick.
The showrunners decided to stoke the fire even more by making reference to it again in Season 3, when Miguel says the line,
Sensei Lawrence told me about how you beat him with an illegal kick.
Hey. The rules state anything above the waist is legal.
Yeah, this debate isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But they don't need to convince me otherwise. I know it was illegal, Daniel, and you know what they say. Cheaters never prosper. Except I guess they did in this case, cause he won. So... But of course, it's not just the crane kick that has fans debating online. Like Star Wars and especially the Who Shot First debate, there are a number of Karate Kid debates. But other than the crane kick, the most notable has to be who is the real Karate Kid. Seeing as the movie centers on Daniel, the safe money is on him. But if you're like me, Barney Stinson,
whom this monster defeated with a cheap, illegal head kick,
and a few others on the internet, you will know the true Karate Kid is Johnny Lawrence. But we are not just a small band of misfits here. This theory is actually pretty popular on the internet and, with Cobra Kai, is quickly gaining traction. Like the crane kick debate, the show's producers make reference to this debate and stoke the flames through a piece of dialogue. In the first episode of Season 3, Daniel says,
When I went to school here, I was bullied, and karate saved me.
Bull. I heard you were the real bully.
Johnny clearly isn't the only one that thinks Daniel was the villain of the movie. What makes this funnier is that the voice of the off-screen man is none other than the show's co-creator, Josh Head. See, he knows what's up.
Comic book fans know it's impossible to pack all of the subtlety, nuance, and overall zaniness from a publication into a movie or television show. But that's not going to stop us from complaining when they don't get it exactly right.
No need to get your little panties in a bunch.
To distract or appease their rabid fan base, producers often fill the adaptation with hidden references and jokes. The Umbrella Academy is no exception, and if you watched the show on Netflix, you might have missed out on some of these secret Easter eggs while you were busy jamming out to the awesome soundtrack. But don't worry, we'll fill you in. In the Umbrella Academy, Vanya earned the ire of her family by writing a tell-all autobiography about her life growing up with Sir Reginald and her adopted siblings.
Dad!
Although Extraordinary My Life is Number 7 didn't earn her any favors with her brothers and sisters. At least Sir Reginald kept the copy she gave him even if he never actually read it. When Vanya returns to her childhood home and pulls the book off the shelf, you can see there's an endorsement on the back by none other than Gerard Way. He was one of the co-founders of the band My Chemical Romance and wrote the Umbrella Academy comic books upon which the series is based. His endorsement says, quote, "An incredible read, ... a revealing portal into the life of Vanny Hargreaves and the life she has lived. I couldn't put it down." At least Vanya got to live out the dream of having a monkey as a butler. Pogo was certainly fond of the children, although his loyalty ultimately seemed to lay with Sir Reginald.
Sir Reginald Hargreaves made me what I am today.
When the children gathered together at the house following Sir Reginald's passing, Pogo talks about the time when their brother Five disappeared. He says Vanya would leave out peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches in case her brother returned feeling peckish.
I'm pretty sure I stepped in half those peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches.
When Five eventually does return home, the first thing he does is fix himself a peanut butter and marshmallow sandwich. Apparently they don't have marshmallow fluff in the future in this fictional universe. While Klaus is looking for things to pawn, his siblings are more interested in investigating what happened the night their father passed away. During one scene, Allison disturbs Sir Reginald's office, and when she walks in you can see a framed newspaper clipping. It's about the Eiffel Tower. But it's more than just a mere set piece. It's a reference to the Umbrella Academy comic books. The first issue is called The Day the Eiffel Tower Went Berserk, and tells the story of the Umbrella Academy attending to an attack happening in Paris, France. Oh, and it turns out the Eiffel Tower is secretly a spaceship, because why not? In the second episode, Run Boy Run, there's a scene where Ben can be seen reading a book. It might not be as exciting as when a writhing mass of tentacles burst out of him, but it does provide some crazy foreshadowing if you look closely. The book he's reading is written by one Anton Chekhov, a well-respected playwright. One of his literary principles concerning keeping details consistent and not introducing things into the story which would never come into play later. If you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter it absolutely must go off. If it's not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there. This definitely seemed to be a sign that although Ben is a ghost in most of the present day, he would have a large part to play at some point. And speaking of foreshadowing, there were a few other moments which pointed towards the conclusion of the first season. But don't beat yourself up if you didn't notice them on the first watch through of the show. When Five travels to the future and finds the bodies of his siblings, it's rather upsetting, but there's one missing face. Five doesn't stumble upon the body of Vanya, which was a super early clue that seemingly powerful characters would have something to do with the upcoming apocalypse. In the rubble, the columns of Vanya's theater are also visible, providing a further clue about her role in this catastrophic event. In the third episode, Extraordinary, Diego finds his mother working on a cross-stitch. While it's easy to get caught up in how weirdly creepy it is to see a robot sewing, take a moment to notice the design. It looks like she's making a moon with chunks of it falling apart. This is a definite nod to the end of the season, which involves the moon being blasted apart. Or maybe it's just another dig at Dum Dum Luther, who spent years of his life on a special mission to the moon.
I didn't really feel like a superhero up there.
We like to think it's a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. The Umbrella Academy isn't the first adaptation of a book actress Ellen Page has appeared in. She was also in the movie Whip It.
We're number two! We're number two!
Which is based on the book Derby Girl by Shauna Cross. Interestingly enough, this movie was alluded to in the fourth episode of the Umbrella Academy called Man on the Moon. In one scene, Allison is standing at a magazine stand poring over a gossip tabloid, but there's an interesting poster nearby. It's an advertisement for a roller derby event, and it's conveniently placed near a magazine called Whip It Snippets. This seems to be a definite callback to the movie Whip It, although we're sad to report there is not a real magazine called Whip It Snippets, not that we checked or anything. Here at Screen Rant, we try to remain neutral and non-judgmental, but we have to say there's just something troubling about a young boy being in a romantic relationship with a mannequin. Or, well, half a mannequin. There's no denying Five has been through some serious stuff in his life, and with a limited choice for companionship, he had to make some unsavory choices.
You remember that little mansion just outside the city limits? Where
It's really saying something about how crazy this show is that Five's love for Dolores isn't the weirdest thing about it. During one scene, Five and Dolores head to the nursery where Five drunkenly wrote calculations all over the walls. Dating a mannequin is one thing, but defacing a nursery? How ghastly. Later on in the episode, you can see Five and Dolores living in the wreckage of the same nursery with his calculations visible on the wall. This next clue you might have missed was a bit more difficult to spot. In fact, If you didn't pause the show at just the right moment, you probably didn't notice it at all. During the 5th episode, there's a shot of Sir Reginald's notes concerning Vanya and her progress. There's a reference to 00.03, and although it's unclear exactly what this means, it could have something to do with the number 3, Allison. As we later learned, Allison was instrumental in convincing Vanya that she's ordinary and causing her to suppress her powers.
You think you're just ordinary?
The relationship between Five and Dolores is pretty weird, but so is the relationship between Allison and Luther.
Is that what you think this is?
I think there's a reason why you never left.
On the one hand, you know that they're not biologically related to one another, and they didn't exactly have a traditional upbringing. On the other hand, they were raised as siblings, so this will they, won't they between them is still kinda icky.
You look great.
When they finally get to have their fantasy dance sequence, it's filled with twinkling lights. These look similar to the lights they had in their secret blanket fort back when they were just a couple of kids. It's as romantic as the love between two adopted siblings, one of whom is mostly made up of gorilla space, can be. During the episode 6, The Day That Wasn't, there's a scene where we see Five making a daring escape from the commission.
You do owe a debt. But it's not to you.
But first, he takes a detour to the briefcase room in order to cause some last-minute mayhem. While he's in there, you can see a set of red gas masks hanging up on the wall. Later on in the 10th episode, the agents who attack the Umbrella Academy are wearing the same gas masks from this scene. We all knew Harold was a bit of a total creep, but of course, he did have a backstory which made you feel pretty bad for him. Like so many of us, Harold dreamed of being a superhero someday, despite the fact that he doesn't have any superpowers. During one of the scenes featuring a young Harold, we see him playing with his toys and referencing someone named the Evil Dr. Terminal.
I'll save you from the evil Dr. Terminal.
In the Umbrella Academy comic books, there's a character named Dr. Terminal, who is a major villain first appearing in issue 3, Dr. Terminal's Answer. Over the course of the series, we heard Allison talking about her beloved daughter Claire many times. We learned that Allison hadn't been able to resist using her powers against her ex-husband as well as her own daughter from time to time.
I heard a rumor that you're really tired.
It's a complicated situation when it comes to being a mother and a superhero, but we did see some heartwarming moments between mother and daughter. One of them involved Allison tucking her daughter into bed when the little girl asked to tell her a story about the Eiffel Tower. This is yet another reference to the Umbrella Academy's trip to the Eiffel Tower in the comic books. Seriously, if you haven't read the one about the Eiffel Tower yet, you should. It's really good. Vanya's character changed quite a bit from the comics to the series, and actress Ellen Page might have had something to do with that. Allegedly, she was hoping that the show version of Vanya would be less over the top and have a slightly more restrained wardrobe. During the episode Changes, we see Harold helping Vanya clean up, and a red strain on her neck happens to resemble the violin string design featured in the comic book character's wardrobe. While this aesthetic looked awesome in the comics, we can definitely see it being a bit difficult to pull off with an actual actress and the limitations of fabric. During the episode White Violin, one of the characters might have looked pretty familiar. While the family is at a bowling alley, a woman comes over and invites Five to play with her son and children his own age.
I would rather chew off my own foot.
Or at least to appear to be his own age, since we're guessing she didn't realize Five is a time traveler. If you thought the woman looked familiar, that's because she also appeared in episode 4. She was the woman who got a front row seat to Klaus traveling in time. Oh, and let's not forget she also appeared at the rave and at the bank robbery. Apparently, this woman just has a knack for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Speaking of time, let's take a look at an interesting detail from the nursery. Little kids' wallpaper tends to not be the most exciting thing to look at, so we don't blame you for not spotting this little detail. At first glance, it seems to scenes of butterflies and kids playing, but take a closer look. You can see a young boy dragging a wagon with something in it. This looks to be a boy pulling along a bald mannequin. Could Five and Dolores have somehow ended up memorialized on this unique wallpaper print? Fans on Twitter pointed it out to actor Aidan Gallagher, who replied by saying, "There's stuff like this planted all over the place. You'll have to watch for it." Don't worry, we will. The second episode of the Umbrella Academy is called Run Boy Run, which is also the name of a song by Woodkid featured in the soundtrack. Run, boy, run. The episode features Five being pursued by Hazel and Cha-Cha, and it does seem like running is really his best option at this point. But the song and episode name really tie into the comic books because there Five is frequently referred to as the boy. There's no denying that the soundtrack for the Umbrella Academy is amazing, and there are some songs that just got stuck in our head. Early on in the series, the students end up grooving to I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany. Yes, it's a classic jam, and even Luther can't help but get into it a little bit. But if you listen closely, the lyrics seem oddly prophetic to the end of the show. One line says, I think we're alone now, the beating of our hearts is the only sound. Later, we see Vanya trapped all alone in the Anquike chamber, and the only sound she can hear is her own heartbeat, which she uses to make her escape. Lots of little kids dream about being able to travel to the moon someday, but Luther actually got to do it. During the third episode of The Umbrella Academy, we see a flashback of Luther's room showing a Lego Stern V-set, which could have been a sign he was going to travel into outer space as an adult. With the exception of 5, all of the Umbrella Academy students have both a birth name and a number. You can see some of these referenced during their introductions into the show. When we see Luther coming out of the door onto the moon, we see he's based out of Moon Station 1. When number 2 Diego shows up, you can see 2 lights on behind him. When number 3 Allison is seen on the red carpet, it's because she's promoting Love on Loan 3. And when Klaus learns of his father's passing, he does so by watching Channel 4. Ignoring the moral issues of Hazel and Chacha's occupation, we can at least all agree their jobs aren't easy by any stretch of the imagination. But sometimes they get a little bit of a super obvious help, like when Chacha is trying to track down Hazel and uses a flyer to do so. The flyer is helpfully labeled How to Find Us and features the bird sanctuary where Hazel is headed with his lady love. It's so obvious it might have well said, here's a clue. Seriously, how did Hazel manage to survive this long when he can't even give Chacha the slip for more than a few hours? Of course, it's not surprising that there are plenty of references to the Umbrella Academy comic books and the Umbrella Academy series on Netflix. But there are other pop culture references to be found if you know where to look. During one scene, we can see Hazel and Chacha storm into the Umbrella Academy, and they use a method which looks pretty familiar. The way Hazel blasts the lock out of the doorknob looks very familiar to the motel scene from the movie No Country for Old Men. Hazel also keeps their briefcase hidden in the vents within the room he and Chacha stay in, which also happens in that movie. In addition to bird watching, is Hazel a movie buff? During the 4th episode, we see Luther and Diego heading to the library in order to find 5. There's an awesome shot which involves the camera panning up the floors of the building. It's an interesting way to represent comic book panels in a real-world scene. The square openings represent different panels in comic books, and it seems as though each panel represents the time that has passed since the previous panel, even though they're shown at the same time. Next time you see the camera moving up the floors in the building, make sure you take a closer look or two. This is definitely one of those awesome details you could easily miss if you didn't know what you're looking for. During the 5th episode of The Umbrella Academy, we see 5 and Dolores walking through the post-apocalyptic future. Now, there's a lot to look at here considering the world is in absolute shambles. But amongst the wreckage, something sticks out as being unusual, even in the context of the wasteland 5 and Dolores are in. The power lines are all bent in a strange way, and we wonder what could have happened to cause such a thing. But later on we learn the answer to that when we see Vanya use her powers to move light posts prior to the apocalypse.
Vanya, what?
It was a massive display of strength and left its mark even after the world was brought to ruins. Even though the students of the Umbrella Academy have tried to have normal lives, well, it really didn't work out that way for any of them.
You both know that fun and games are restricted to Saturdays between noon and noon.
But we were just...
Be prepared to do your studies alone. Do you understand?
The long-awaited season of The Umbrella Academy is here, and of course, we've already binged it. If you haven't had a chance yet, hold off on this video for now because there will be spoilers, so consider that your warning. But if you're all caught up, let's take a look back and go over some of the Easter eggs, hidden references, and nods to the comic you might have missed the first time around. Allison's love life has been a subplot over the course of The Umbrella Academy, and it's not surprising considering whatever is going on with her and Luther. I honestly can't tell if it's the adopted siblings thing or the fact that Luther has a gorilla body that's weirder at this point. Anyway, in the first season, we learned Allison has an ex-husband named Peter and a daughter named Claire, and both of them were on the cover of the magazine that we saw an officer reading in the beginning of the first season. Thankfully, our heroes survived the apocalypse, but ended up in different time periods near the Avon Theater, whose movie offerings changed between several Umbrella Academy members. When Ben and Klaus showed up in 1960, the theater was showing the exceptionally fitting film Curse of the Undead. By 1961, when Allison made her debut, it changed to Curse of the Werewolf. This could be a reference to the fact that she was cursed to live without her voice and power following her first season confrontation with Vanya, or it could be a nod to her preoccupation with the moon because of the time her brother Luther spent there. Vanya and Five showed up in 1963 when Kiss of the Vampire was playing in stereo surround sound, which seems particularly poignant for poor Vanya. Another noticeable background in the first episode is a shop called Cecilio's Children's Clothing Store. One of the child-sized mannequins is dressed like the fictional character Madeline from the book of the same name by Ludwig Bemelmans. I was disappointed that we didn't see more of Hazel and his lady love in the first season, but before he was taken down by the Swedes, he managed to slip something into Five's jacket pocket. Later, it was revealed to be the video footage filmed by a charming elderly couple named Dan and Edna Frankel, who were recording their trip to Dallas and, by extension, JFK's infamous motorcade. The Frankel tape was a major motivator this season, and also a likely nod to the real-life Zapruder film. This footage, taken by a man named Abraham Zapruder, gave us the most comprehensive view of JFK's motorcade. It's known as the most important 26 seconds of film in history, but to be fair, that was a popular expression before James Cameron created Titanic, so maybe historians should, look into updating that. In Season 2, we were introduced to a woman named Lila, who spent time with Diego in an institution. Later, we learned the Handler had adopted her in the same way Thanos adopted all of his children. The penultimate episode of the series is called 743, and it was revealed that this was the case number which involved Lila's biological parents being taken out by number 5. We also saw AJ spell out 743 with pebbles when he was swimming around in a fishbowl on the Handler's desk as a way to get a message to Herb. But 743 was foreshadowed way before this. In the second episode of the series, a much more mobile AJ explained why the Handler was being demoted, and among his various grievances, he mentioned the 743 incident.
Remember that whole 743 incident?
The Umbrella Academy left off on a major cliffhanger, but if I'm being honest here, it just left me thinking a lot about birds. No, I'm not losing my mind, at least I don't think I am. I'm talking about the fact that there were so many moments involving birds this season. When Elliot talks about getting supplies to develop film, he mentions that he wants to avoid the park because there's been too many pigeons flying around.
But I gotta cut through the park and there's this overbreed of pigeons.
Elliot.
Then when Vanya, Sissy, and Harlan are playing hide and seek, a bird surprises Vanya when she enters the barn. More birds fly over Klaus's van in episode 3. We see Harlan showing off his powers with a toy bird. And we learn that thanks to mucking up the timeline, the Umbrella Academy is now the Sparrow Academy. Is it a coincidence that 1963 is also the year Alfred Hitchcock's famous film The Birds was released? Or have I just gone completely bird-brained at this point? In non-bird related references, we have a scene in which Diego and Five go after their father, Reginald Hargreaves, after tracking him down using some archaic technology known as a phone book. While going through some papers, Five manages to find an invitation addressed to Reginald from the Consulate of Mexico and Mr. Hoyt Hillenkoetter. Roscoe Henry Hillenkoetter was a real person, and he was the first CIA director after it was created in 1947. Everyone in the Umbrella Academy has impressive powers, and their comic book counterparts have even more. In order to impress his followers, Klaus shows off some skills with the help of his ghostly brother Ben, including one in which he appeared to levitate a few feet above the ground. Comic book fans may have gotten a chuckle out of this one, since it's something Klaus can do in the source material without poor Ben having to lend a hand. Hillenkoetter wasn't the only real-life historical figure to merit a mention in this season of the Umbrella Academy. Luther got a job working for a man named Jack Ruby, who you might know as the person who took out Lee Harvey Oswald. While the real Jack Ruby wasn't anywhere near as powerful or prestigious as this fictional counterpart, there were some similarities, including one we saw in episode 3. We saw him with an adorable dachshund, which makes sense considering Jack actually had one, named Sheba. While Jack broke the law, Sheba was presumably being a good girl inside his car, which led one of his sisters to remark that his crime wouldn't have been premeditated because his brother would have left Sheba somewhere safer if he knew what he was going to do. Back in the fictional world of the Umbrella Academy, we saw a man standing on the sidewalk with a sign reading, "The end is nigh." This is almost certainly a reference to the famous Watchmen graphic novel by Alan Moore, and it probably won't surprise you to know that the Umbrella Academy author Gerard Way is a huge fan of his work. He cites Moore as one of his inspirations and said that he wouldn't have been able to create his own fictional superheroes without his influence. We also saw this Doomsday Prophet back in the first episode, when Luthor first emerged in the 1960s. Little does this guy know that he was actually right about the world ending. Well, sort of. In this same scene with the Doomsday Prophet, we also saw Luthor going out for a jog, looking an awful lot like another fictional strongman. He looks like he's going out for a Rocky Balboa training montage, and is even dressed up like the titular hero from Rocky during his infamous montage. Of course, Rocky didn't trip because he thought he saw his sister, for whom he has romantic feelings, but hey, every Easter egg doesn't have to be perfect. Although I have to admit that I'm surprised to see him working out since he told Five he doesn't even know what a spotter is. Although, to be honest, I'm not too familiar with the way gorillas stay in shape. Speaking of staying in shape, Luthor apparently does know how to cultivate mass since we saw him chowing down at a barbecue restaurant just before running into Allison. Clearly, he's bummed out after realizing that she's married and is stuffing his face in a gross but, if I'm being honest, relatable way. While we didn't see Luthor pile on the pounds like Thor in Avengers Endgame, in the comic book, number 1 does significantly bulk up after falling into a deep depression. This barbecue scene was likely a nod to this particular comic book element, even though Luthor must have jogged off all those calories at some point off screen. The 4th episode of Season 2 is called The Majestic 12, and we learn that Reginald Hargreaves is a member of this secretive organization. This is one of the many elements of the Umbrella Academy that has a real-life basis. Well, okay, kind of. See, the Majestic 12 could be a real organization, depending on who you ask. Many conspiracy theorists that are interested in UFOs believe that the Majestic 12 is a group founded by former President Harry S. Truman to deal with recovering and investigating alien aircrafts. The FBI investigated supposed evidence surrounding the group and declared it a hoax, but that hasn't stopped people from believing. However, the Majestic 12's extraterrestrial connection makes sense, considering a big reveal about Reginald that we'll talk about a little bit later on. Speaking of dear old dad, family meetings at the Umbrella Academy tend to vary between bad and terrible, so the group is understandably apprehensive about meeting with Reginald even though he's kind of not their dad yet. Time travel has a way of making complicated family relationships even more so. In order to keep things civil, Vanya suggests that they use a conch shell to decide who gets to speak, and anyone not holding the shell must remain quiet and listen.
Diego, you don't have the conch.
If this meeting strategy sounds familiar, it might be because it's one utilized in the famous 1854 novel Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This book tells the story of kids trying to govern themselves on a deserted island. Spoiler alert, it does not go particularly well. Not that the Umbrella Academy attempts at organization tend to go well either, much to the frustration of number 5, who manages to be the oldest of the group of siblings all born at the same time. He made a deal with the handler and got his hands quite messy to say the least in order to secure a briefcase to bring them all back to their proper place on the timeline. But when several of his siblings failed to show up on time, 5 understandably grew frustrated and exclaimed that all they had to do was be there, and it wasn't as if they had to defeat a giant sea serpent. In But the Past Ain't Through With You, the Umbrella Academy did fight a sea serpent, who attacked Japan after being enraged that a toy maker was profiting off unlicensed depictions of his character. I know, I didn't realize monsters were interested in copyright law either. Plenty of strange things happen in the Umbrella Academy, and this season, one of the most disconcerting moments was seeing a human version of Grace with a Texas accent. This Grace was dating Reginald and decided to do some digging when strange things kept happening. She went through his paperwork, finding photos of people like Fidel Castro, Lyndon B. Johnson, JFK, and a map of the motorcade. But if you blinked, you might have missed that the chalkboard had plans for a televator, the next great mode of transportation. While it might not have caught on as well as Reginald would have liked, he did go on to invent it later on. In the first episode, it certainly seemed as though Cha-Cha didn't survive the moon exploding at the end of the first season, yet in episode 8, we see a commission agent carrying what looks to be Cha-Cha's mask, and it's a pretty distinctive one. This could have been an entirely different agent, but according to showrunner Steve Blackman, it could have been Cha-Cha holding the mask. Is this just an Easter egg relating to Cha-Cha, or a clue that she's alive and well, and could show up again in season 3? When Creed Bratton described his experiences with cults on The Office, he said, "Followers have more fun, but leaders make more money," and this certainly seems to coincide with Klaus's experiences. Between his powers, the help of his brother Ben, and his natural charm, he made amassing a ton of loyal followers look easy. He called them Destiny's Children, a clear reference to musical group Destiny's Child. And honestly, Klaus's second season style may not quite have been on Beyonce's level, but he's getting there. This wasn't the only musical reference Klaus made, as he quoted TLC's Waterfalls as well as Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive and Everybody by the Backstreet Boys.
Destiny's Children!
Obviously, there's a lot of history mixed in with this season of The Umbrella Academy, and not all of it has to do with pop music. Most people believe that Lee Harvey Oswald took aim at President John F. Kennedy from the window of the Texas School Bank Depository, which is a building we actually saw during episode 9. Usually, leaving a note for someone is considerate, but not when you're trying to leave behind your controlling husband and start a new life. That's a lesson Sissy learned the hard way when Vanya was taken into custody and interrogated by the FBI. They were not messing around, to say the least, and plunged Vanya into a deep, dark part of her psyche. This scene is set to Partita 2 in D minor on violin, which makes sense for a few reasons. The first is that Vanya is an accomplished violinist, and the second is that in the comics, she's known as the White Violin. This song isn't the only notable comic book reference contained in this scene. Vanya is understandably upset and frustrated with her inability to control her powers. She questions why her siblings are able to, while she does things like blow up the moon and bring about the apocalypse multiple times, which is a fair question. Thankfully, her brother Ben is there to point out that everyone else in the Umbrella Academy received years of training along with the emotional pain inflicted upon them by Reginald, while Vanya only got the latter. He says Reginald treated her like a bomb before she was one, which seems to tie into the graphic novel finale, or Brothers and Sisters, I Am an Atomic Bomb. Earlier, when I mentioned the Majestic 12, I said that we'd get back to the whole Reginald Hargreaves as an alien thing, and that time has come. Comic book fans knew this going into it since it's addressed early on in the series. We saw clues that this was the case in the first season, and the second left no doubt that Reginald is from another planet. But before he tears off his human suit and unleashes his rage on the Majestic 12, one of his associates mentioned that Reginald was interested in learning more about the dark side of the moon. Does this mean there really was some reason he sent Luther there? Or was Reginald just a really big Pink Floyd fan? The Umbrella Academy members are always willing to think the worst of Reginald, but to be honest, he usually deserves it. They suspected that he had something to do with the plot against JFK after seeing a man with a black umbrella standing near the motorcade. Reginald ended up using a stand-in, and it turned out that he was not aware of his co-conspirators' true motives that fateful day. But what some fans might not realize is that there really was an Umbrella Man there that day. Some people suspected that he was planted there by the CIA in order to twirl his umbrella to signal Lee Harvey Oswald. His name is Louis Stephen Witt, and he simply wanted to heckle JFK as he rode by. The exact circumstances surrounding the loss of Ben have been a mystery, but Season 2 gave us a glimpse of his funeral and more evidence that Reginald really hates kids.
You allowed number 6 to die on this mission.
It wasn't our fault.
Not only did he make insensitive comments to his surviving children, but he decorated Ben's coffin with squid tentacles, which seems to be in pretty bad taste. We finally saw more of Ben using his powers when 5 arrived in the past, but it still seems like an unnecessary grim addition to his final resting place. When Allison heads back to the present with her family, she leaves a note behind for her husband Ray. She left it inside of From the Earth to the Moon by Jules Verne, which is a book Ray gave her as a gift in the first episode. He commented that Allison was always looking at the moon, which could have either been because she was thinking of Luther or because she was worried about it exploding again.
I see you staring at it every night, so now you can see it whenever you want.
When I first saw the promotions for Squid Game, I thought it was going to be a lighthearted reality TV contestant show, kind of like Takeshi's Castle or something. But it was anything but, with the gritty battle royale having scenes that will haunt your dreams. Seriously, I'm still not over episode 6. The show, which has been a massive hit on Netflix, is packed full of Easter eggs, foreshadowing, hidden details, and behind-the-scenes trivia, some of which you may have missed the first time around, so we thought we'd take a look at them here. Let's go. Now this is a given, but there will be many Squid Game spoilers in this video, so if you don't want to be eliminated from your spoiler-free game, I'd recommend coming back to this video after you finish the show. Now, let's start with the show's biggest twist, that Oh Il-nam, aka Player 1, is actually the mastermind behind the games and the one who's running it from behind the scenes. While this was undoubtedly a shocking moment for many of us out there, myself included, there were actually many clues as to his real identity. For starters, the fact that the neighborhood in the marble game looks so much like the one he grew up in as a child, the fact that his number is 1 and that there are no other elderly players in the game, the fact that he has a deep knowledge about the games played, such as Tug of War, and his delight at playing red light, green light despite all the violence happening around him. But there are some even bigger moments of foreshadowing that we missed the first time around, such as the robotic girl's scanner in red light, green light not picking him up as a player, the fact that his name translated into English is Number 1 Man, and in the montage where multiple contestants are waiting for the van to re-enter the game, they're all gassed except for Oh Il-nam, who just enters the van of his own volition. Also, in his conversation with Song Gi-hun, Oh Il-nam basically convinces him to rejoin the game and goes through his reasoning for why he wants to keep on playing. We really should have seen it coming. The knowledge of what the next game will entail is constantly sought after throughout the show, and players like the Doctor, who obtain information on the next game by providing favors, are eliminated due to it not being fair to the other players. However, every player had the opportunity to learn what game would be next if they paid close enough attention. That's because, on the walls of the dormitory where the players sleep, you can see murals of children playing different games, all of which are played at some point in the show. If you look closely, you can see an illustration for Red Light, Green Light, Tug of War, The Glass Bridge, and, of course, the Squid Game itself. Continuing on this foreboding train, a number of characters' deaths in the show are foreshadowed in their lives outside of the game after the vote is called to stop it. For instance, Kang Se-byeok holds a knife to a man's throat and tells him she'll rip it open, which is similar to her death at the hands of scumbag Cho Sang-woo. Another resident scumbag, Jung Deok-soo's death is foreshadowed as he jumps off of a bridge after being trapped by some gangsters trying to kill him, just like the moment he falls to his death from the glass bridge in the game. Ali also steals money and leaves a man to die, just like Cho Sang-woo does to him in the game, while Cho Sang-woo lies in a bathtub in a drenched suit, foreshadowing his fight with Song Gi-hun in the rain wearing a drenched suit. Still with the foreshadowing, at the arcade, Song Gi-hun picks a certain prize to give to his daughter due to the way it looks. Ironically, the box just so happens to resemble the coffins the players are placed in when they're eliminated, while the box has a realistic-looking gun lighter inside, perhaps indicating the true violence of the games. Now this one's a bit contentious, but Song Gi-hun wins 4.5 million at the racetrack, and seeing as his number in the game is 456, and he wins 4.5 million, and there are 6 zeros in a million, maybe that's also foreshadowing his number? Maybe? One of the most notable visuals in the show are the uniforms and masks the guards wear in the games. Seeing as the soldiers are basically indistinguishable wearing the same costumes, they're given different shapes on their masks so people can tell the difference, with the circle representing workers, the triangle representing soldiers, and the square representing managers. And I have to admit, it's a game show and these look like PlayStation symbols to me, so maybe there's that too. However, the shape of the mask and the different roles they have were based on ants and an ant colony, which fits with the animal mask theme seen throughout the show. Another notable visual is the colorful and intricate staircase the players must ascend to get to the next game. Now, if those stairs seem familiar to you, there's a good reason for that. That's because they were inspired by Escher's Relativity, which is a lithograph print by the Dutch artist MC Escher and depicts a world in which the normal laws of gravity do not apply. This is pretty fitting, seeing as the laws of the normal world and society do not apply in the world of the games, or hell as the players call it. Jung Ho-yeon stole many a person's heart with her performance as Kang Se-byeok, with many fans falling in love with the character. What makes it even more impressive is that this is actually her first ever acting role. But Koreans will likely be very familiar with Jung Ho-yeon, as she is a well-known fashion model in the country and was a runner-up in the 4th contest of Korea's Next Top Model. Also, Lee Byung-hun, who plays the enigmatic frontman, is a well-established actor in Korea and has also appeared in a number of Hollywood movies such as The Magnificent Seven, G.I. Joe, and Terminator Genesis. When it comes to the green jumpsuits the players wear, the show's creator, Hwang Dong-hyuk, was actually inspired by school uniforms and the outfits he used to wear as a kid. Initially, he was going to go all in on the school uniform aesthetic, but that would have included shorts, so instead opted to go with the green tracksuits, which were also picked so the red color of blood would pop on screen. The hot pink worn by the guards was picked as it's on the complete opposite side of the color wheel from the green, showcasing that the guards and players are on different teams and are opposites of one another. Now, while the Squid Game is unfortunately embroiled in plagiarism claims, with some stating it as a copy of the 2014 Japanese movie As God Wills, Hwang Dong-hyuk has claimed that his inspiration was manhwa, which are Korean comics that he used to read as a child. Before it got the title The Squid Game, it actually went by another, admittedly much more boring name. In 2019, Netflix announced the show was to be called Round 6, which is in keeping with the 6 different games the contestants play, but this was eventually changed to the much more fun title Squid Game. The Squid Game is visually stunning and very aesthetically appealing, with the big immersive sets where the games are played being especially captivating. Surprisingly, though, these sets were actually built for real, with very little VFX used in the show. And for instance, the set used for Red Light Green Light, including the robotic girl, were actually built for real, all of which allowed the actors to fully immerse in the scene. With the crazy amount of foreshadowing and intricate storytelling, it's not surprising to learn that the script has actually been in development for some time. In fact, Hwang Dong-hyuk actually started the script all the way back in 2008, finishing the first draft in 2009, but still having to wait 10 years to successfully pitch it. Still, he had to wait to actually finish the series, with filming at one point postponed due to COVID. As we said, very little VFX were used in the show, and not only were the sets real, but the amount of contestants who played the game. For the Red Light Green Light game, there are indeed 456 actors in the scene, instead of digitally inserting people into the scene in post. And finally, let's end on some goofs, shall we?
A what?
One of the best goofs in the show comes down to a typo, as when the frontman reviews the former glass factory workers file during the bridge game, the file reads that he had been working in the factory from 1897 to 2020, meaning that the character could be well into his hundreds. Another goof comes when Gi-hun enters the password for a credit card which he took from his mom secretly in the first episode, and enters 0426 as his birthday. Later on, we see his file in the frontman's room, and it says it's actually on Halloween. Whoops.
Well, the powers that be have requested even more Squid Game content, which isn't surprising since the little South Korean mind screw that could has taken the world by storm.
Here.
This is 15 things only fans noticed in Squid Game. Let's dig in! First up, gotta mention the one you almost definitely figured out by the end of the series. All the games are hinted at from the very beginning of our player's time at what I'm just going to call Squid Island. If you look at the walls, it's pretty easy to make out what games are going to be played, although in order to really see them, you'd have to take a moment to move the beds and really look. Although I'm not sure what this would do to help, say, the bridge game, or to guess that your partner in marbles would be facing certain doom. Still, cool detail that any fan's eye is bound to be drawn to on a rewatch. This next one is something fans may have noticed and gotten totally wrong. See, when the guy from Train to Busan challenged, I know his name is Gagyu. It's just, he's the Train to Busan guy. Anyway, when he challenges Gi-hun to Dokji, which is basically South Korean Pogs for all my 90s brethren out there, he gives him 2 options, red and blue. A lot of fans have suggested that this is sort of a red pill, blue pill situation wherein the choice the player makes leads them to become either a player or one of the uniformed workers seemingly employed by the mysterious organization. Now, this is supported by seemingly all of the players we see playing that initial game choosing the blue card, as explained by TikToker Lucy What Won. Unfortunately, creator Hwang Dong-hyuk was quick to quell the theorizing, saying that these fans are more creative than him and that the choice of colors comes from a restroom ghost story wherein a spirit asks a would-be pooper to choose between red and blue toilet paper. Can't make this stuff up. However, it's a trick question and both options lead to death, so really the choice of red or blue cards holds no value for the player. Either way, they're going to wind up in the same position. This works not only because it factors in with the more haunting themes of the show, but also because I now know that South Korea has poop ghosts. Alright, with that long entry out of the way, let's go fast. Get out of here, Sonic. When number 1 seemingly wets himself while sleeping, it appears he actually just emptied the water bottle he was given onto his pants as a means of furthering his own narrative. Or he just went through the natural methods, but this version seems more devious, so I'll take it. There's also the chance that number 1 isn't scanned, as seen in this blink and you'll miss it moment where he doesn't appear to have a green overlay in the Robo POV. Now this is another big ol' maybe since the shot goes by so fast, and there's also this lady who also doesn't appear to get scanned, suggesting it's actually a VFX oversight. Still, pretty suspect if you ask me. Anyway, let's get to some comments. Jordan mentions that in the moment when number 1 can't remember his own name, he's actually trying to throw his fellow players off his scent. Since he's a billionaire who's made his money off of debt collecting, there is that chance that people might know his name. Now, not to turn this into a disproving theories video, but it is entirely possible this is just him continuing the old guy who can't function right ruse. After all, why pretend to not know his own name to throw them off when he could just make up a new name? This guy could totally pull off a John Harrison. It worked for Khan. Wait, no, it didn't work for Khan. Everyone guessed that before the movie even came out. Ah, jeez. Mrs. FloFlo9, if that is her real name, pointed out something I completely missed but makes complete sense. When Ji-hun is going up the elevator to meet his malevolent ex-friend, he has to take it to the 7th floor, and the number is real hard to miss. What an awful elevator panel design. But yeah, that's right. It's 7, as in the 7th game that Ji-hun has to play, with there being a total of 6 on Squid Island. And yes, I am really calling it that. I'm a very stubborn person. Commenter Brandon has noted some foreshadowing in the form of Ji-hun betting on horses in the beginning, only to become a horse of sorts himself when he's bet on by the VIPs. Side note. Holy crap, screw those guys, am I right? I know y'all are just picking actors available in Korea who can say things in English, but man, oh boy, that episode was really cringy. Like, that was more cringy than my videos. Like, next level Super Saiyan 3 cringe.
I like you better when you don't talk.
Oh, and Sidney Pollack wants his eyes wide shut masks back, you jerks. Anyway, commenter Tiffany makes a great point about Sang-woo's final moments. Is it Sang-woo? Sang-woo. Sang-woo? I'm gonna say Sang-woo. When he goes to shuffle himself off this mortal coil, he sits soaked in a bathtub, still wearing his suit and everything. Now, what a lot of people don't notice the first time around, at least those without a decent knowledge of Korean culture, is that he's using a charcoal stove to kill himself via carbon monoxide poisoning. Sadly, this is a very common method in South Korea. So, the attempt at ending his own life while wet correlates directly to him ending his own life while wet. Now, this is one of my favorites that I picked up on, albeit in hindsight for obvious reasons. Lee Byung-hun, the famed South Korean actor known for several Hollywood roles, and because I have to bring this up every time, for being in the absolutely legendary I Saw the Devil, plus The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, and Joint Security Area, and Inside Men. Look, dude's prolific, and I might have a crush on him. Point being, dude has a pretty notable special appearance as the frontman. Him showing up was not unlike Gang Yu showing up in the first episode. He's just super freaking famous, so much so his appearance is hinted at in the forever scarring all of us episode 6, in which doomed player Ji Young quotes a line from Inside Men, and when she can't remember the title,
Lee Byung-hun's in it?
Big ol' thanks to Jason in the comments for adding a little bit more depth to something I'd partially noticed while watching the first time through, the gift box that Ji-hun gives to his daughter, which hilariously contains a lifelike gun that's in fact a lighter. The obvious parallel here is that the box looks just like the coffin boxes used to carry out dead players. What gives this moment a bit more depth is that the lighter is potentially pointing out that the players are cremated. Okay, here's another wild theory that I don't necessarily agree with, but I can't help but enjoy, and which I'm sure fellow fans have loved dissecting during their rewatches. As commenter Charlie, as well as tons of other internet denizens have pointed out, number 1 could in fact be Ji-hun's father? I know, it's pretty silly and kind of melodramatic as a twist, but the clues actually are there, kinda. After Ji-hun refuses the milk, preferring the chocolate variety, number 1 says that his son hated milk as well. Now, on October 24th, he says his son's birthday is coming soon, and we see in this file that Ji-hun's birthday is October 31st. They both used to play in a similar neighborhood to the one during the marbles game, and the gate to both number 1's home and Ji-hun's are, kinda similar, I guess. To me, this all reads as coincidence, but who knows? A whole bunch of commenters pointed out that number 1's file is missing with the current slate of players' documents, starting with number 2 when Junho is going through his whole spycraft phase. As Rose the Mad points out, Minyao's method of sweet vengeance against that douche canoe with the dumb tattoo involves her grabbing him and falling backward, directly referencing the line earlier in the show following the tug-of-war game, wherein she says that it made her feel powerful. Se Byok's death is also set up earlier. She is of course brutally killed by a sneaky knife to the throat by Sang-woo, and what did she do in an earlier scene while out in the normal world? Well, she threatened this turd burger with a knife to the throat. The only way it could be any clearer is if she had somehow spilled coffee on herself during that fancy dinner, instead of, you know, her own blood. That glass shard was crazy big, by the way. I know I harped on the VIPs, but that's a real runner-up for silliest moment in that episode. And finally, Junho also has his potential death set up earlier. He's of course shot by his own brother, and we last see him falling off a cliff, cementing the ineffectiveness of law enforcement in this unfair and cruel world. Earlier, he kills 2 separate workers in similar fashion. One is strangled and another is shot, with both being disposed of in the ocean. Going one step further, the latter was led to believe that Junho was on his team, or sort of a brother-in-arms, before being shot and killed after the truth is found out. Very similar to the situation on the cliff. Now, am I thinking too hard about this? Maybe. It's kind of my job.
I love you, baby. I can stay for math.
It's fine. I don't need you here if you wanna. And she's gone. Okay, hello.
Big Mouth Season 4 just finished, and now we wait for Season 5. Let's be real, you know you're gonna rewatch the series now. So before you get to Season 4 Round 2, let's go over what you might have missed, including voice actor drama, cameos, and a few special surprises.
Okay, can we just lower expectations? I'm actually really nervous.
Big Mouth is not one to shy away from controversy. In fact, it usually swan dives right into the deep end of controversy about as often as it can manage, but the show hails itself as a sex-positive, progressive series, eager to have the uncomfortable conversations other shows shy away from. So when Big Mouth got in trouble online for having Missy, an African-American character voiced by Parks and Recreation actress Jenny Slate, they didn't run away from it. In fact, they made fun of it themselves. Not only that, but they managed to seamlessly recast the actress for the last 2 episodes, now voiced by newcomer Iowa Debris, who had a perfect impression of the character's original voice. Though I hope Jenny Slate stays with the show in some capacity. One of the most endearing plot lines from the latest season featured Natalie, a trans girl who stays with the other girls in camp. The show did a great job portraying her character and her friendship with Jesse. The character was voiced by Josie Toda, who is killing it right now on the new Saved by the Bell series as Lexi. While Natalie's stay on Big Mouth was a short one, it was certainly memorable. Her and Jesse promised to stay friends, but unfortunately forgot all about each other as soon as their school years began. Is it too much to hope that Natalie's gonna get transferred? I think my favorite joke this season was when Nick and Andrew were trying to decide which new girls they wanted to date by the Netflix previews of them. They ended up selecting the cafeteria girls, inadvertently finding themselves as characters on their TV show instead of Big Mouth. Well, that's funny, because the actresses who played them, Maya Erskine and Anna Konkle, star in their own series, Pen 15. That series also deals with the troubles of puberty in a hilarious, unglamorous light. It doesn't get quite as raunchy as Big Mouth does, but it covers a lot of the same subject matter with hilarious results. Nick Kroll has appeared in all sorts of shows, ranging from Parks and Recreation to What We Do in the Shadows. What he's still best known for, though, is his performance as the sardonic Rodney Ruxin in FX's hit comedy The League. And it's clear that many of the core actors have stayed close over the years. A great deal of them have already appeared on Big Mouth, such as Mark Duplass, Jason Mantzoukas, and Rob Hubel. This season, they were joined by Andre himself, who finally got a character modeled after him. Sure, he voices one of Jay's older brothers, but this time, he had a regular character known as Gap-Toothed Camper, who was clearly modeled after him. It wasn't the most flattering of cameos, but hey, it counts. If the character Seth Goldberg sounds familiar to you, that's because he was voiced by famous comedian Seth Rogen. The actor, who most recently appeared twice over in American Pickle, absolutely killed it as Nick's camp best friend turned Andrew's camp best friend. His name is actually an amalgamation of Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. The two are longtime writing partners and close friends. I don't know what it is about Big Mouth, but the series has absolutely no problem scoring A-list talent. It features one of the best extended casts in adult animation. This year, they added This Is Us star Sterling K. Brown as Jesse's new jerk of a boyfriend, Michelangelo. The biggest surprise here was that I didn't know it was physically possible for me not to like Sterling K. Brown. Somehow, the character of Michelangelo was such a jerk that I practically cheered when he and Jesse finally broke up. It's kind of crazy, right?
Do I detect an accent, or are you just British to see me?
Big Mouth is a show that really loves to reference the fact that it's on Netflix. Not only does it do musical numbers as the recaps and include dozens of meta jokes about how everyone is binge watching the newest season, but it also frequently references other shows. One of the biggest references this year was when Andrew literally lived through the plot of Russian Doll, losing his life over and over with the same light musical score. Even Natasha Lyonne made an appearance as Nadia. Can they do The Witcher next season? Those steamy Henry Cavill scenes are gold for a show about kids going through puberty. Jordan Peele has become one of the biggest names in Hollywood. He's redefined big screen horror forever. To Big Mouth fans though, he'll always be the ghost of Duke Ellington. This year though, he made a reference to his horror films as well. While Missy was in the Horrority, she saw a mirror version of herself cutting up other versions of herself. This was a reference to Peele's terrifying movie Us, which showed a mirror version of Lupita Nyong'o trying to take out her entire family. Luckily, the reference was short because that movie absolutely terrified me. One of the funniest things about the end of the series was the gratitude that Jesse uses to combat her and Nick's anxieties. If the voice sounded familiar to you, that's because it was voiced by Zach Galifianakis from the Hangover movies and Between Two Ferns. While the character is likely a one-off joke character that won't appear in the next seasons, I hope we'll see more of him in the future to fight off their anxieties while making folksy jokes. One of the grossest parts of the latest season was when Andrew found that he could not go to the bathroom through the whole of his stay in summer camp. While this was a clever way of showing how his anger at Nick was ruining his life despite him pretending he didn't care, it was still pretty disgusting. The aggressive personification of his bowel problem was actually voiced by character actor Paul Giamatti. I would love to know how this was pitched to the award-winning star from acclaimed films like Sideways. I played John Adams one time, but what I've always wanted to play is a young boy's gastrointestinal distress, yeah! If you're a fan of Master of None, then you are likely a fan of actress Lena Waithe, who plays Denise on the show. She's become quite the star as both a writer and an actress over the years, appearing in big-budget films and launching her own TV shows. On her road to greater stardom, she recently portrayed Missy's college-aged cousin Lena, who starts on her own journey of racial self-discovery that culminates with the character's voice change. While Lena likely won't have much of a role going forward, we would love to see her create an animated show next because she's really good at it. You know, if you have the time with the 7 other billion projects you've got going on right now, please. If you're like me, you have desperately relied on John Oliver's Last Week Tonight to get you through the trials and tribulations of 2020. Well, clearly we are not alone because John Oliver was cast as the camp counselor for this season of Big Mouth. And not only that, but there were plenty of references to his television series throughout the run. John Oliver, I know you're probably a huge Screen Rant fan too, so if you ever want to guest voice an episode, I'd be 100% down for that. I mean, as long as I get to host an episode of Last Week Tonight, huh? It's only fair. Missy's awakening showed her learning a lot more about her own culture than she ever had before. She changed hairstyles, personal care products, and even the overalls. The iconic overalls! Part of that journey included references to famous artists like Rico Nasty and SZA. If you look closely, you can see posters hanging in the background. This shows the classically nerdy Missy getting exposed to things her uncool parents would never think to show her. If you don't watch a lot of primetime television, because who does these days when Netflix is a thing, you might have missed the singing competition sensation, The Masked Singer. This show often has celebrities or guests singing under a silly disguise only to be revealed later. Big Mouth hilariously riffed on this by having a new mysterious principal who wasn't revealed until the end. It was then shown that he was Roman Polanski, the former beloved director who has had, let's just say, a very controversial life. Honestly, this might be the most unrealistic part of the series so far. I don't even think he's allowed in America anymore.
Before you guess, think about who'd be willing to actually do this. I think it's Paula Abdul.
The gang decided to go to the Horrority house during Halloween to confront all of their greatest fears. Instead, they all faced all of their own character arcs, gaining self-actualization as they faced off against horror monsters and their own problems. Well, except for Nick, that is. Yeah, he still needed another episode to get through his. Of all the characters, Missy's may have been the best because they showed all of the various variations on Missy that have appeared in the series. We got to see my personal favorite, the superhero Missy, once again. Most of the parents in Big Mouth are honestly pretty terrible. They're either way too wrapped up in their own lives to care about what their kids are going through, or they're just right out abusive. The two parents who are my absolute favorite are Missy's parents, Cyrus and Monica. They seem like genuinely sweet, although strange people who care a ton about their kid. That's why it was so gripping when Missy had some very understandable grievances on how she was being sheltered by them. Part of what makes them so real is that they're voiced by real-life married couple Jordan Peele and Chelsea Peretti. I also love both of those people in real life, so I'm sure they're just as great at parenting as Cyrus and Monica are. There are a lot of shows and movies that feature complex dream sequences with a lot of lore behind them. One of the most popular dream movie rules is that if you lose your life or get hurt in a dream, the same thing happens to you in real life. This refers to movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street, Inception, and The Matrix, which all play with this idea. Big Mouth references this famous movie rule this season, but it doesn't stick to it. Andrew loses it like 300 times in his dreams this year, but it never actually matters.
If you die in a dream, you die in real life, Jesse.
That is not true.
That's what I read.
Big Mouth owes its existence to a lot of adult animation TV shows that blazed the trail for such an inappropriate cartoon to exist in this day and age. Perhaps no show deserves more credit than The Simpsons. The show pokes fun at this by having the main characters make fun of Bart Simpson after they do what he never can: actually go up a grade. Bart famously has been in the same grade throughout the entire run of the show.
That yellow schmuck's been in 4th grade for like 30 years.
The episode Nick's Star, which was set entirely in the imaginary future of Nick's nightmares, was one of my least favorite the series has done so far. It was pretty bleak and it lacked a lot of the awkward puberty humor the series is known for. Even the characters of the show seemed to dislike it. That being said, it did have quite a few fantastic references to science fiction dystopian movies. Both the Blade Runner and Mad Max franchises were referenced, and I'd rather watch one of those movies again than this episode. One of my favorite references this season was when Maury showed that he had his own version of the Comedy Central classic Drunk History. That show's one of my all-time favorites and features a ton of the cast members from Big Mouth relaying historical stories while absolutely hammered. The show brilliantly cuts in actors reenacting the scenes with the exact same dialogue given by the inebriated narrator. It's funny and you get to learn stuff. It might be weird, but I'd legitimately watch Maury's version of the show right now. I absolutely love it when Big Mouth directly references or makes fun of Netflix in the series. This year, when Connie and Maury are looking through Netflix, there's several shows suggested to them. Those are Tuca and Birdie, Grace and Frankie, Russian Doll, Glow, and Queer Eye. All of these shows feature actors from Big Mouth. Come on, that's a great way of advertising for your coworkers. Who knew that these guys were such big fans of Synergy? You don't see the Queen's Gambit advertising for anyone else's show, huh? I mean, that show is set before Netflix was a thing, but they could at least try. As much as I love Big Mouth, it will never be my first animation love. That honor will always rest with the brilliant show Futurama. Apparently I'm not alone, because the Big Mouth creators threw in a direct reference to the series this season. If you look closely at Jessie's therapist's office, you'll see that one of her toad statues is actually the Hypno-Toad from Futurama. That seems like a strange thing for a therapist to have, considering how scary the Hypno-Toad is, but hey, everyone has a hobby, I guess. Sometimes a joke or reference in Big Mouth is so ridiculous that you have to wonder about whoever it was that wrote it. For instance, I think at least one of the writers is a huge Jack Nicholson fan because there were multiple references to the famous actor in this season. The first was of the Joker, who briefly appeared in a cameo. It was specifically the Jack Nicholson Joker, which seems odd in a world dominated by Joaquin Phoenix and Heath Ledger's portrayals. Sorry, Jared Leto, but you are never getting a Big Mouth reference. The other Nicholson joke came with Andrew's Halloween costume about his character from As Good As It Gets. I don't know who this Nicholson humor is aimed at, but I'm sure they found it hilarious. Maybe Jack himself is a fan. If you haven't seen Tommy Wiseau's terrible masterpiece, The Room, go and watch it right now. It's a movie that is so bad that it wraps around the quality continuum into one of the most memorable films of that decade. If you like it, you should probably then watch The Disaster Artist, which retells the story of the making of The Room with a lot of Big Mouth actors. One of the best parts of the film is the infamous, "Oh, hi Mark," which is referenced by Missy this season. They need to get Tommy Wiseau to voice a character next. You know he'd do it.
Hey, I'm Mark.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Andrew's bowel disturbance was one of the most infamous moments from the series. While the joke didn't quite land for me personally, I do have to admit that what he named his, children during the fake birthing sequence was hilarious. Zach and Cody were the absolute best choices. This is, of course, a reference to the Disney Channel series The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody about two twins. I wonder if the Sprouse brothers watch Big Mouth and if they thought it was funny. I mean, if any of you guys know them, can you ask them for me?
You're probably having some serious withdrawal symptoms after binging through all of The Queen's Gambit, but don't worry, we have something to tide you over. Despite being a mini-series about chess, The Queen's Gambit has been a fast-paced, exciting, and glossy success on Netflix. Sorry for all the major shade I just threw at chess fans there. But unfortunately for fans of the show, it is just a limited series, meaning that's the lot. Thankfully though, we've been doing some digging, and like a chess master, we have noticed some hidden details, moves, facts, and general pieces of information you might have missed. In this video, we will take a look at 25 or so, we're kinda loose with the numbers, things you might have missed in The Queen's Gambit. Spoiler warning, we will be discussing the full season of Queen's Gambit, so unless you don't want us to checkmate your spoiler-free life, we suggest you come back to this video another time.
I may have just played the best chess player of my life.
Let's start with the end, shall we? The series had a ton of draining and emotionally taxing moments, but Beth finally gets her chance to travel to the USSR to compete and take on the grandmasters that once eluded her. But the show ends somewhat openly, in a way which leaves the audience slightly puzzled. As Beth heads to the airport, she asks the driver to stop so she can wander the streets of Moscow, finding herself in a square occupied by older men playing games of chess. As she approaches them, they embrace her as a hero, and she sits down to play with them one-on-one, and that's it. That's the ending. Like The Sopranos, it ends rather abruptly, but also like The Sopranos, it leaves us wondering what it all means. Did Beth defect to the USSR? Does she return to the US? Have the last few moments all been an illusion and it's all been a concoction of Beth's mind and her substance addictions? Well, if you were fearing a negative ending, Anya Taylor-Joy may have just stopped you worrying, with her stating that it was just a nice moment for the character where she can just relax and let her hair down and take in her moment of victory. Say it was actually a happy ending. In fact, Taylor-Joy found it so emotional that every time the camera cut, she would begin crying as she becomes so attached to the character. Gosh darn it, now I'm gonna cry. One of the best things about the show is the sensational performance provided by Anya Taylor-Joy, who really took the character into her stride, unafraid to embrace both the highs and the lows of the character. Taylor-Joy is so believable as the character that we have no issue in accepting her as the genius chess player who can quickly strategize off the cuff. But what is surprising, that Taylor-Joy didn't know the moves she would have to make until just before shooting. In fact, she only found out what moves she would have to make minutes before shooting, so it would stay fresh in her mind. Which, I mean, I guess you would also have to remember your lines, which is pretty important. But what also makes Taylor-Joy's performance impressive is her physicality and the way she moved, which is very nifty and well choreographed. This is actually a very deliberate move made by Taylor-Joy, who actually used her skills as a former ballet dancer to know how to move her hands in a way which are nifty and cool. Because it probably wouldn't have had the same effect if she had awful depth perception like me and knocked all the pieces over. Speaking of body language and physical movements, the way the actors move are specifically designed for their characters. For instance, Taylor-Joy wanted to make sure that Beth's body language was far different from her male counterparts to make her stand out and show the disparity between the genders. Taylor-Joy said that she made her moves in a quick and ruthless way, but still undeniably feminine, which again requires not knocking all the pieces over. I'm still banned from all chess tournaments. It happened one time. But Taylor-Joy isn't the only one with easily definable mannerisms, with Thomas Brody Sangster adding the nervous habit his character Benny has, where he is constantly playing with his ring. As we said before, what makes the show so special is that we have no problem finding the characters believable. But it turns out that Taylor-Joy knew almost nothing about chess before the show and had to learn as production went on. But she believes it worked in her favor, as it allowed her to be invited into a secret world, and that it was exciting having to learn all these moves so quickly, and that she was proud about how her brain picked up the moves, or at least tricked her into knowing all the moves. She may have been an amateur at the start, but I don't think I would take her on in a game anytime soon. She wasn't alone in having a limited chess knowledge though, with Brody Sangster and Harry Melling both having very little knowledge of the game. Luckily for the actors, they had some very highly trained and skilled coaches to teach them the ways of the game. And when I say highly trained and skilled, I mean highly trained and skilled, with their teachers being Russian chess master Garry Kasparov and notorious American chess teacher Bruce Pandolfini. In fact, they didn't just teach the actors, but choreographed every move we see in the show. But while the coaches may have choreographed every move, the actors not only had to learn to play the game and every move, but also had to physically play the game, meaning that no extras or doubles came in to play the game for them. I know that playing chess isn't exactly a Tom Cruise-worthy stunt, but still. But it isn't just the actors who had to learn and understand the game, but the VFX team who had to learn so they could bring to life the hypothetical moves Beth plays out in her own mind. So basically everyone who worked on the show are basically chess masters now. As we said, the actors played every game of chess that occurs in the show, even the ones we don't see. A number of the games are played through close-ups of the actors' faces, a reference to the pawn's sacrifice. But instead of just having the actors pretending to be playing chess, they actually played out the game as if we could see it, meaning that there is an actual game going on out of sight. Talk about method acting! As you probably guessed, with both Kasparov and Pandolfini being involved with the show, the games we see are hyper-realistic. But not only are the games themselves and the strategy behind them realistic, but the setup itself. A number of shows and movies play fast and loose with the setup of the game, a criticism that chess masters usually find. But the masters behind the camera setup and positions are often extremely realistic. If you're thinking though that the locations of chess tournaments can't really be that dingy and depressing, you would be wrong. Chess expert Dylan Loeb McLean wrote in the New York Times that he can attest to the fact that tournaments in the era were often played in dingy and odd locations, and despite the grandeur of the tournament, the equipment was often cheap and second-rate along with the furniture, with McLean saying that the atmosphere and setting in the show is painfully accurate, which is yay production team, and sorry all chess fans out there. He also went further to commend the show on the way they captured the high tension and drama of real-life chess tournaments, as well as the obsessive qualities some of the competitors have. But also, the games we see take place were actually based on games that happened in real life. For example, the match in which Beth defeats Harry for the Kentucky State title was from a game in Latvia in 1955. One thing Loeb McLean did have problems with though was the fact that the speed in which the game is played, with it being much faster than what an actual competition would be like. In real life, the competitors have 2 hours to make 40 moves, while players in the show take mere seconds to make their move, much faster than actual real-life players. That is probably done for the purpose of television, as I don't think people would have time to sit around for 2 hours waiting for players to make their moves.
It's been 5 hours.
Another thing McLean took issue with is the fact that players talk to one another during the match, which is apparently a big no-no in the world of chess, not only being bad sportsmanship but strictly against the rules. Garry Kasparov had a major influence with his work behind the camera, but he was also offered the chance to play a part in front of it, with the show's creator Scott Frank initially asking him to play the part of Borgov. Kasparov ultimately turned down the role, opting instead to stick with a position behind the scenes. For a show that pays so much attention to detail and to make sure things are as accurate as possible, you might be surprised to learn there is a mathematical mistake in the show. But it doesn't surprise you to learn it was done on purpose. The mistake in question is the teacher's math mistake 5 times 3 equals 18, which causes the teacher to look for an eraser, which is of course located in the basement where chess is played. One of the constant themes that runs throughout the show is Beth's constant struggles with substance abuse. This stems from her early age at the orphanage, where she is given a diet of different substances to take, one of which is the green drug, Zanzolum, a tranquilizer given to the children in order to make them easier to manage and consequently breaking a lot of modern-day laws. But if you have never heard of the pill before, there is no reason to be embarrassed because it actually doesn't exist. While it is based on real-life pills, it only exists in the world of Queen's Gambit. You might be wondering if the story of the Queen's Gambit is based on true events, and to tell you the truth, it is and it isn't. It's because it does make reference to real games and people who actually existed, but the primary source is actually a novel of the same name by Walter Tevis, who wrote The Hustler and The Color of Money. The novel was so popular and such a success that the Netflix series is not the first attempt at bringing this story to the screen. In fact, one of the closest times the novel made it to screen was back in the 2000s, when the late Heath Ledger was attached to make his directorial debut with the adaptation. Ledger was such a big fan of the book that he was apparently very excited, with him feeling related to the character of Beth. The adaptation was so far down the pipeline to become a movie that Inception and Umbrella Academy Ellen Page was signed on to play the role of Beth. Sadly though, Ledger passed away in 2008 and never had the chance to turn his passion project into reality. The novel is so good and such a draw that it was the book alone that convinced Anya Taylor-Joy to sign on to the project. Apparently, the creators approached Taylor-Joy before they had a script and gave her a copy of the novel instead to discuss their plans. Taylor-Joy was so taken by the character and by the story that she immediately agreed before seeing the script and used the book as her main reference. Anya Taylor-Joy may be the biggest name on the call sheet, but like Game of Thrones' Brody Sangster, there are a number of appearances that you might recognize but not know from where. For example, you may recognize the name Marielle Heller, who played Alma Wheatley, and that is because she is the director behind such films as A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood and Can You Ever Forgive Me? You may also recognize Harry Melling, who plays Harry Metlick, but if you're like me, you may not instantly recognize where from. That's because he has changed somewhat since his Harry Potter days, where he played Harry's thuggish and spoilt cousin Dudley Dursley. Melling has gone through somewhat of a resurgence of late, but will certainly be known for his role as Dudley in Harry Potter, especially to her co-star Taylor-Joy, who is apparently a huge Harry Potter fan, actually learning English through the Harry Potter books as she was raised in Argentina, and apparently Melling graciously sat and listened to Taylor-Joy freaking out about the franchise. Back to the hyper-reality of the show. You were probably wondering about the book Modern Chess Openings that Mr. Scheibel gives Beth, and if it is indeed a real book. Okay, let's face it, you probably weren't wondering that. Sorry again, chess fans. But if you were in the minority who were wondering, it is indeed a real book. Modern Chess Openings, or MCO as it is colloquially known in the chess world, was written by Richard Cluin Griffith and John Herbert White and published in 1911, with 15 editions since published, and is seen as the first scientific... Sorry, I just sent myself to sleep there. I'm going to move on from this before I fall asleep again, because I still have like 6 more entries to go. As we mentioned before, the show makes references to real games, but also references to real people. While Beth Harmon is a fictional character, she is based on a number of real-life chess players. Harry compares Beth to chess champion Paul Morphy, but she actually shares more similarities with another champion, Bobby Fischer. The timeline set in The Queen's Gambit coincides with the peak of Fischer's career, with Beth winning her championship in 1967, while Fischer won his 8th and final championship that very year. Both Beth and Fischer found themselves living alone in their teenage years after their guardians moved out. Both learned Russian as to gain an advantage over their opponents. Both also requested money from the White House to help fund their trip to the USSR, and both of their lavish dress sense caused them to not have enough money to help fund the trip themselves. The one glaring difference is gender. Obviously, Beth is a woman, while Fischer was apparently very dismissive of female players and saw them as inferior. Having the gender flipped in the story could be Tevis's sly dig at Fischer, with Tevis being an amateur player and passionate fan and a supporter of strong female characters. One of Beth's most notable physical traits is her glorious red hair, which makes her look like a member of the Weasley family. Maybe she really is destined for Harry Potter. But you might have guessed that the hair is not actually the actor's own, with the wardrobe department applying a number of wigs to get her into the character. Netflix posted a video of Taylor-Joy's transition into Beth, and it's strangely cathartic. But it's not just the wigs that the wardrobe department get props for. Yeah, now that's a pun. They also get an applause for the use of costume, which if you look closely has a similar theme throughout. That's because a number of the outfits she wears have lines on them. And you know what also has lines on it? A baseball diamond. And you know what else has lines on it? A football field. And you know what else has lines on it? A chessboard. And I'm gonna assume it's the latter that the wardrobe was paying reference to. But it's not just the wardrobe that has careful detail, but the choice of lipstick that Beth wears. That is because the shade of lipstick Beth wears signifies her age, with the color changing throughout the course of the show. Furthermore, it is a reference to Alma, who serves as Beth's mother figure in the show, with the shade of lipstick being a tribute to her pseudo-mother. That's a strangely touching tribute. I think everyone likes that. And finally, the show may be mostly set in the US as well as ending up in the USSR, now just Russia, but the bulk of filming is actually shot in neither. In fact, the show is actually predominantly filmed in the capital of Germany, Berlin.
Exactly.
Ozark has been an amazing show from start to finish, but there's more lying in those murky waters than first meets the eye. Ever since Breaking Bad ended, we were left with a deep void in our life. Thankfully though, Netflix gave us another dark, gritty, family-based crime drama in the form of Ozark. Just as addictive and also full of twisted family values, Ozark has been a roller coaster ride ever since the first episode with a glossy style and a stellar cast. Also like Breaking Bad, Ozark is created with a high level of attention to detail, meaning there are tons of subtle references, Easter eggs, hidden meanings, and fun behind-the-scenes stories for us to dig into. And we've got our shovels out here as we're going to go into those hidden depths and give you 25 things that you might have missed and put the O in Ozark. And beware, there will be some heavy Ozark spoilers in this video. Alright, let's get started. The Langmores are said to be the ones who are cursed, but Season 3 only further proved that it is actually the Bird family that are cursed, bringing down everyone around them. This is actually secretly suggested in their family name. On the surface, the name Bird doesn't seem to mean much, but showrunner Chris Mundy explained there's a hidden meaning to it. He said that their name represents the family taking flight from Chicago after the going got rough, migrating south and becoming an invasive species, taking over their new habitat and wreaking havoc. This is ironic, seeing as the youngest member of the family, Jonah, becomes obsessed with ousting the European starling that is seen as an invasive species that disrupts the local ecosystem, just like the birds.
Can I kill starlings?
What? Also, the birds bring a great level of death and destruction with them, and one of the birds most associated with death is the scavenger bird, the vulture, which is used in their promotional material. But the analogy of the family goes a little bit further than that. Addiction is a constant theme throughout the show, with a number of characters addicted to alcohol, drugs, power, and of course, money. And the birds are the human embodiment of addiction and greed. Not only are they power hungry and obsessed with accumulating wealth and status, but others who've become associated with them, such as Ruth Langmore, usually end up in a worse place than they started. The Langmores see them as a sickness, and Wyatt describes the family in almost the exact same way you would describe an addiction, and many people who come in contact with the birds often find themselves dead or in jail. Fitting, seeing as they are in the drug gambit. An example of an addictive trait is repetition, and going through things in a circular motion. One of the things you might have noticed is that despite the dilemmas and problems they find themselves in, the birds are always finding themselves in the same situation and falling back to the same place they originally found themselves in. This circular motion and repetition in the plot is shown from the very beginning, with the O in Ozark being highlighted to indicate the circular trajectory the family find themselves in. You might be thinking we're looking a little too much into that, but when you pair it with the next point, it makes more sense. That's because in every episode, the title cards are always different and unique. Other than the O that is the main focal point of the title card, we see 4 different pictures that form the shape of the letters Z-A-R-K, which of course spell out, Ozark. But in each episode, these 4 letters depict different imagery and foreshadow the events to come in that episode. Take episode 1, which shows Marty on his knees, as well as Wendy's lover falling to his death, as well as the Chicago skyline and the gun, all of which have an impact on the plot in the pilot. If you end up rewatching the show, and we strongly suggest you do, make sure to check out the different imagery in each of the title cards, and of course the circular O that wraps them all together. Ozark has had a number of emotional and shocking deaths, but one of the standout ones has to be the death of the fallen pastor, Mason Young. Mason had a rough time of it, to put it mildly, with his nightmare beginning when his pregnant wife was killed by the Snells, who were using his sermons to secretly deal drugs, but kept his child, Zeke, alive. Mason struggles to care for his son and deal with the loss of his wife, and Zeke is eventually taken from his care, eventually ending up with the woman who caused his misery. Mason snaps and takes his anger out on the birds, kidnapping Wendy and eventually threatening to kill her with a screwdriver. To save Wendy, Marty shoots Mason and leaves him bleeding on the floor. But if you look closely, there's a small Easter egg, with Mason's blood forming the shape of wings, symbolizing he is a fallen angel. Now, seeing Jason Bateman directs and stars in Ozark, and the fact that the show is on Netflix, makes it unsurprising that there's an Easter egg to the hit comedy Arrested Development, which also starred Jason Bateman as Michael Bluth. In the show, Michael takes over family affairs after his father, George Bluth Sr., is sent to prison, as we find out his dealings weren't always exactly legal. In fact, he even hides a vast amount of cash in the walls of the frozen banana stand. Know who else stashes cash in the wall? Marty Byrde, who hoards cash inside the walls of the resort they launder money through. But it's not just the banana stand that acts as the only Easter egg for Arrested Development, although this Easter egg is much more directly linked to Bateman himself. In Arrested Development, Michael has a slight obsession with maritime law. I mean, who doesn't? And is very well versed when it comes to legal matters at sea. It seems Bateman's character Marty also has a love of maritime law, as he pays reference to it when he lays out his master plan. Maybe we should start calling him Jason Boatman. At least I make myself laugh. But Arrested Development is not the only project on Jason Bateman's CV to get an Easter egg in Ozark, with there being a callback to the comedy movie he starred in alongside Jason Sudeikis and Charlie Day, Horrible Bosses. The scene that is referenced in Ozark is when in Horrible Bosses, Dale and Nick break into Bobby's home, and Dale rolls down his sleeves and places them over his hands and picks up a drug-filled ashtray, before of course dropping it and sending the contents flying. Jason Bateman's Marty does a similar thing when he too rolls down his sleeves to cover his hands and not leave fingerprints while searching through his therapist, Sue's house. Who knew sleeves could be so versatile? One of the things you might have noticed in the background is that the characters in Ozark like to watch a lot of football. But if you are paying close attention, the action on screen isn't NFL, nor is it college football. It's never addressed, but the football they are actually watching is the Canadian Football League, also known as the CFL, with a number of Toronto Argonauts and Montreal Alouettes games being shown on screen. Why it's CFL is unclear. It might be something to do on the production side, but we like to think the Birds are just die-hard CFL fans. Maybe they prefer the 3-down system? Or maybe it's because The Rock used to play in it? Who knows? Alright, this next one goes out to all you music fans out there. In the episode titled Kaleidoscope, Marty starts discussing the day he believes music died and mentions American singer-songwriter Ritchie Valens. The connection with Valens and Ozark goes deeper than that though, with Esai Morales, who plays Del on the show, playing the brother of Ritchie, Bob Valens, in the 1987 movie La Bamba. Now, you probably haven't spent much time looking at Jason Bateman's feet or the shoes he wears, because let's face it, that would be kind of weird. But if you do end up taking more time looking at the actor's feet over the course of his works, you might notice a similarity, that he always wears his favorite shoe brand, New Balance. Jason Bateman seems to have a deep affiliation with the brand, so it's no surprise that Ozark is no different, with him of course rocking the New Balance. Because, like Kawhi Leonard, Bateman gets paid. Like Breaking Bad, Ozark has a lot of attention to detail when it comes to the criminal actions the characters partake in. And like Walter White and his Crystal Blue, you might be wondering just how accurate these criminal acts are. Well, in Ozark's case, the money laundering you see in the show is actually very, very accurate. That's down to the fact that one of the agencies that seek to stop money laundering, the FBI, actually helped them do it. The writers needed to learn and develop an understanding on how to launder money to make the show more realistic and help with the story and character building. So they did what any person would do and called the FBI to ask how exactly they could do it. Chris Mundy stated, "We had an FBI agent who investigates money laundering come and sit down with us for a day so we could pick her brain." So yeah, safe to say, it's pretty accurate. One of the things that makes this show so great is the cast. Particularly its star duo Jason Bateman and Laura Linney. Bateman and Linney undoubtedly do a great job and are almost perfect for the parts. But originally, neither of them were interested in the project. Laura Linney reportedly had no interest in doing a series, but reportedly became interested upon learning Jason Bateman's possible involvement and wanted to see him expand his acting range, moving from comedy to drama. But Bateman too reportedly wasn't initially interested, as he did not want to get involved in another series after Arrested Development, and instead wanted to focus on features. But as you know and is pretty clear, they were both eventually convinced to join the show. One of the ways Bateman was convinced to join the cast of Ozark is because he was given the opportunity to direct. Initially, a reason why Bateman wasn't as interested to join the show was because he wanted to direct a feature movie, and the scheduling conflicts would have prevented him from doing so. So, the show offered him to direct all the episodes in season 1, but a scheduling conflict prevented him from doing so. So he instead directed 4 of the episodes, and became one of the producers of the show. So all in all, it worked out pretty well for him. The strength of the pilot episode as well was another reason he became so interested in the project. But just because the writing was already great didn't mean it couldn't have been expanded further. Linney was also intrigued by the writing and the strength of the script, but became concerned that the character of Wendy was somewhat one-dimensional and just a wife. So, Linney voiced her concerns to Bateman, who agreed with her, and the two fleshed out the character together, making her as dark and duplicitous as any other character on the show. Although even Linney has no idea which way Wendy's moral compass is spinning. It's not just the strength of the primary duo that makes the show so engaging though, with there being some great performances from a number of side characters. One such performance is the one provided by Peter Mullen, who played one of the local drug kingpins, Jacob Snell. And although his character was short-lived, his performance was probably one of the most memorable. Mullen is a well-known character actor and came to Bateman's attention after seeing him in Top of the Lake, and was so intrigued by the actor that he aggressively pursued him, desperate to bring him in the show. They did this before there was even a script to show the actor, but Mullen was seemingly convinced by the pitch given to him. Another one of the great actors in the show is Sophia Hublitz, who plays Marty and Wendy's daughter Charlotte, but the role nearly went to Dance Mom star Chloe Lukasiak, who auditioned for the role, and you can even see her audition tape online. Check it out. Sometimes there's things we really don't want to have to do in our jobs, and that was certainly the case for Ruth Langmore actor Julia Garner. Although you can see where she is coming from in her case, as in one scene she was required to hold a mouse. Now, while the mouse was presumably sanitary, Garner apparently has a phobia of rodents. And so in a scene where she's supposed to pick up a mouse and drop it into some water, she kept having severe panic attacks and was unable to complete the scene. So instead, a hand double had to be used. And if you look carefully, you may notice that it isn't Garner's hand that drops the mouse, but instead probably one of the production team. The crew apparently got a good laugh out of it though, although Garner was left somewhat embarrassed over her rodent-based fears. Man, Ratatouille must be like a horror movie for her. One of the best characters to be introduced in Season 3 was Wendy's brother Ben, played by Tom Pelphrey, and his early death was ultimately one of the saddest. While there are some theories that suggest the character isn't actually dead down to the fact that his death took place off-screen, the showrunners have seemingly put an end to those rumors, saying the character is done and dusted. But let's of course not forget Jon Snow. But what made the character so compelling is the performance given by Pelphrey, who played the character of delicacy and tact, making sure that the struggles of bipolar disorder and mental illness were handled in a respectful way. One of the ways he did this was by fully researching mental illness and studying it so he could fully dive into the character and portray the full amount of complexities people with mental illness have. Like money laundering, the show also pays a great amount of attention to detail to the world of fly fishing. While it might not seemingly sound as complex as money laundering, the writing team did a great deal of research into the world of fly fishing. The producers brought in 2 expert fly fishermen to teach the cast to train the actors and to search through the scripts to make sure the script was accurate to the local fishing language and that it was natural. In fact, they did so much research that Mundy said you'd have thought they were doing a documentary on the subject. Bateman and Linney may have shaped their characters and their progression, but one actor who was seemingly along for the ride was Mark Menchaca, who played Russ, with the actor saying he had no idea where the character was going and initially learned from the other cast where his character's arc was headed. Menchaca eventually asked Mundy where his character was going and said he was pleasantly surprised and was thrilled by the character's development. There's no doubt that the setting of the Ozarks makes the perfect backdrop for the show, but you might be wondering why that particular location was picked. Well, the reason comes down to the memories from the show's creator, Bill Dubuque, who is from Missouri and used to spend his summers working at the Lake of the Ozarks and became attached to the place he labeled as the Redneck Riviera. He said he was also inspired by the people he met there, meaning a number of the characters are based on real people. That's a concerning thought. But although it is set in Missouri, doesn't mean it's actually predominantly filmed there. And like a number of MCU movies, the show is actually filmed in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta has become a production hub in the US, with a number of shows and movies being filmed there. And Ozark 2 has made use of the area, with a majority of the water scenes being shot on Lake Altoona, which is roughly an hour away from Atlanta, and a number of interior scenes being shot at Chateau Elan. If you wanted to take a trip down to the Ozarks though and delve deep into the show, you can now do that. That's because the show's popularity has led to the creation of the real-life Marty Bird's Bar and Grill in Missouri. So if you're hungry and are in Missouri, you can head down to Marty's and chow down on Ruth's Smoked Wings, Wendy's Philly Steak Sandwich, or Dell's Nachos. While we might all love Ozark here, sadly we can't have too much of a good thing, as it was announced that Season 4, which will be the next season, will sadly be the show's last. Although we will have to wait a little longer for the final season due to, you guessed it, COVID-19. However, despite the restrictions the pandemic has caused, production did start this year, with filming beginning on November 9th in 2020. Although strict safety protocols may mean the show takes a little longer to complete, and there will likely be greater distance between the crew and cast, as well as less props used on set.